You do not start life as a glamorous favorite. You start as someone's profit margin. You are born in a cramped slave room in Athens, or dragged in from a raid on Thrace. Either way, you are property before you are a person. If you are war loot, your story begins with fire and shouting. Cities in Thrace, Asia Minor, and the Black Sea coast fall to Greek armies. Prisoners line up in chains. Men sort people, checking teeth and muscles, with no feeling at all. Strong bodies go to farms. Skilled hands go to workshops. The pretty boys are flagged for household use. You are in that group. If you are born in the house, things look calmer but are not kinder. Your mother is a slave. You are oikogenais, born into the household. That sounds warm. It is not. It just means the owner does not have to pay for you. You grow up under watch. You learn early that the wrong tone can earn a slap. In a city such as Athens, tens of thousands of people live this way. Some historians think there were as many slaves as citizens. You are one small body inside that number. No vote. No name in any public record. The law calls you andropodon, a man-footed thing. By the time you are around 10 to 12, people start to talk about your future. Not your future, really. Your owner's. Traders visit from the port of Piraeus, or from Corinth. They look you over, teeth, shoulders, hair. No one asks what you want. That question does not exist. The slave market is your big debut. Buyers crowd under awnings. Some people are branded. Some are chained. A few, like you, are cleaned up to look valuable. You stand on a small platform while the dealer lists your features, your age, your good behavior. You are sold. A name is called. Money changes hands. That is the moment your path narrows. You have a new master. Your life as a future concubine has officially begun, purchased for household and pleasure. Your new owner does not carry you home himself. A servant leads you through crowded streets, while your buyer talks business with friends. You walk a half step behind, eyes lowered. You already know the rule. Stay quiet, stay useful, stay alive. The house you enter is not huge, but it feels like a maze. Courtyard in the center, men's quarters on one side, women's quarters hidden deeper in the back, storage rooms, kitchens, slave rooms. You will not have your own space. You are an extra body, fitted into whatever corner the household can spare. An older slave explains the layout like a drill instructor. Do not cross into the women's rooms without orders. Do not speak when free men are talking unless they speak to you first. Do not look guests in the eye for too long. Every line is a rule that keeps you from being beaten. Your owner looks at you like a craftsman inspecting a tool. He tests your Greek, asks where you come from, maybe changes your name on the spot to something he likes better. Your past shrinks to a single sentence. Your future sits in his hands. You start with basic tasks: carrying water, cleaning cups, sweeping floors, running small errands to the market. These jobs are not random. He is watching how you move, how fast you obey, whether you lose your temper when someone mocks you. You notice patterns. The owner calls you more often than he calls others. He likes you nearby during meals, even when other slaves could do the job. At night, he keeps you within reach, not in the rough common room by the kitchen but closer to his bedchamber. To the city, he is your Kyrios, the legal head of the oikos, and you have no standing against his will. No one says the word concubine out loud. Respectable men pretend such roles do not exist in their own homes. Yet other slaves know. They see where you sleep. They see how the master's hand lingers on your shoulder. In account books, you are a line of expense. In law, you are an object. Inside this house, though, your body is turning into something else. A private luxury, a status symbol, a quiet secret the walls learn to keep. Groomed for elite male company. Your training starts fast. The house wants results, not potential. An older male slave, often a pedagogos, becomes your handler. He teaches you how to stand, how to walk, how to serve wine without spilling a drop. He has scars on his back, so you take every lesson seriously. Grooming is a daily ritual. Body hair is removed with bronze razors or pumice stones. Olive oil covers your skin, then scrapers pull it off with sweat and dirt. Your hair is styled to fit current taste. In Athens around the 5th century BCE, shorter cuts show discipline. Perfume comes next, usually imported from Egypt or Cyprus, and worth more than most workers earn in a month. You smell like wealth, even if you will never own any. You learn table etiquette. Pour wine from a crater at the right angle. Hold the jug with your right hand. Keep your wrists steady. Do not talk over free men. If someone jokes about you, laugh lightly. If someone insults you, stay silent. One wrong reaction can turn into punishment. Education follows. You memorize short poems by Anacreon and Sappho. You learn songs played on the aulos. You practice reading simple Greek texts. You do not get full schooling, but you gain enough to hold small conversations. Your owner wants you to seem charming, not clever. A clever slave makes people nervous. Physical fitness matters. You stretch, run, and practice basic dance steps. You handle cups and trays until they feel like extensions of your hands. Your posture becomes straight, your movements smooth. This is not vanity. This is training to raise your master's status. A graceful attendant makes him look powerful and refined. Clothing becomes part of the job. You wear lighter, finer fabric than work slaves. Not expensive, but clean and styled. You are meant to be seen, not hidden. Other slaves notice the difference and whisper. Favor breeds jealousy. You learn to watch your back, even in the slave quarters. Your owner tests you constantly. He watches your reactions to guests, to stress, to touch. He wants a companion who pleases without effort. You feel your old self fading. Your new role forms layer by layer. Polished, obedient, attractive, and always controlled. Serving at all male symposia nights. Your real workload begins when the sun goes down. The symposium is the heart of elite male life in cities like Athens in the 5th century BCE. It looks like a party, but it runs on rules tighter than a temple ritual. Free men recline on couches. You stand. That detail says everything. Wine flows, but never straight. You mix it in a crater with water, usually 3 parts water to 1 part wine. Too strong, and the night turns into chaos. Too weak, and guests complain that the host is cheap. Guess wrong, and someone blames you. The host stays blameless. You carry cups, called kailikes, from couch to couch. You refill, you wipe drips, you avoid stepping on cushions. You serve food in small bites, often figs, cheese, and bread. You also handle the fun parts. Music, games, flirting. The aulos player does the music. You get the rest. Men debate politics, philosophy, and who insulted whom at the last festival. They praise democracy and then treat everyone who serves them like furniture. One guest quotes Homer. Another burps loud enough to shake the walls. You keep your face calm. Your job is to make them feel clever and admired. Guests know that certain slaves are available. You are one of them. If your owner taps the couch, you move closer. If a guest touches your wrist, you do not pull away. Consent is not a word here. The law gives you none. The room fills with smoke from oil lamps and cheap incense. Voices rise. Laughter can switch to anger in seconds. A drunk guest may grab you or throw wine in your face for a joke. You cannot react. A reaction means punishment later. The symposium also builds your owner's status. A beautiful, skilled attendant signals wealth and control. You are a walking display of luxury. Men judge your master by how well you serve and how well you look. Navigating power, desire, and jealousy. Daylight does not make your position safer. It only makes it clearer. You now live in a triangle of power that can crush you fast. At the top sits your owner, legally allowed to beat, sell, or loan you out. Under him stands his wife, the Kyria of the household. She has no political power outside the house, but inside these walls, she rules the women and slaves. You are a threat to her pride and her status. Greek marriage in Athens, especially in the 5th century BCE, is about heirs and alliances. A wife guards her role as mother of citizens. You are a reminder that her husband seeks pleasure elsewhere. She cannot shame him in public, so she may punish you quietly. A bad look from her can mean fewer rations, harsher tasks, or orders that leave you exhausted before the next symposium. Other slaves watch the attention you get. They scrub floors and haul grain while you pour wine and wear perfume worth 8 drachmas a jar. Favor breeds resentment. A kitchen slave may trip you on purpose. A guard may correct you with a fist when no one sees. You cannot report it. The steward will tell you to behave better. Free youths in the household can turn hostile too. A teenage son wants to prove his status. He sees his father favoring a slave boy. That burns. He may insult you in front of others or demand you serve him with the same obedience. You must obey. The law backs him. You have no rights under Athenian statutes, recorded in speeches by men like Demosthenes. Your owner's affection is dangerous. If he praises you too openly, guests joke that he is ruled by a slave. That hurts his honor. He might respond by acting cold or violent to prove control. One tender night can lead to a beating the next day. Rumors travel fast in the household. The slightest hint that you show preference for another person can trigger rage. Your body is not yours. Desire is a one-way street. You learn silence, speed, and careful smiles. You study moods like a hunter studies tracks. One wrong gesture can shift the balance. Favor can lift you high. It can also drop you hard. laws, morality, and public respectability. Athens in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE loves rules. It loves courts. It loves speeches about honor. It just does not love you. Under Athenian law, a slave is property. You cannot testify in court unless tortured, because the system claims slaves only tell the truth under pain. Nice civic values. Legal speeches by men like Demosthenes and Aeschines openly state that being sexually submissive marks a man as weak and unfit for citizenship. You are not a citizen, but your presence still threatens a man's public image. Here is the big twist. Elite men can sleep with slaves, male or female, without penalty. The shame lands only if a freeborn male takes a passive role. So when your owner uses you, he feels protected. If anyone suggests he enjoys you too much, rivals can attack him in court for lacking self-control. They do not care about you. They care about his reputation. Public respectability is everything. Men speak in the assembly, serve as jurors, and march in festivals. They must look disciplined. Keeping a male concubine is fine as long as it stays in the shadows. If rumors spread that a man lets a slave influence him, his political career dies. One joke during a symposium can become courtroom ammo. You become a legal risk. Your presence in the men's quarters can fuel gossip. A rival might hint that your owner has lost his Andrea, his manly virtue. Aeschines used that line of attack in trials, mocking opponents for letting young favorites rule them. The hypocrisy is loud. The city celebrates beauty in art and theater. Vase paintings show scenes with slaves serving and pleasing their masters. Yet the same society acts shocked when someone admits to enjoying what everyone sees. For you, the danger is constant. If your owner fears damage to his name, he can drop you fast, sell you, hide you, lock you away. The law will not stop him. Your job is not only to serve, you must help protect his public mask. Fail, and you become the problem he solves with a quick sale. Morality here has one rule: reputation first, humanity last. Life beyond the household walls. When your owner steps outside, you become his shadow. Agora, baths, temples, festivals, you trail half a step behind. Athens, in the 5th century BCE, is busy, loud, and sharp. You are in the middle of it, but never really part of it. On market days, you follow him to the agora. Citizens argue about grain prices, war plans, and who lied in the assembly. You carry baskets, coins, and whatever he buys. Your clothing marks you as a slave. Simple chiton, no fancy cloak, no weapons. If anyone bumps you, they do not say sorry. They shove you again and blame you for existing. Your owner talks politics with friends. You stand close enough to pour wine from a street vendor, far enough not to interrupt. You hear names: Pericles, Cleon, generals, orators. The city debates its future while you keep track of bags and jars. If something gets stolen, the beating lands on you. At festivals, your world widens a little. During the Panathenea, crowds pour up to the Acropolis. You go along to carry offerings or stools. You see huge processions, bright textiles, and sacred statues. Citizens take pride in their city. You take mental notes on which streets stay shaded and which alleys are safe to slip through if trouble starts. Bathhouses and gymnasia are another lesson. Free men strip, oil up, and talk sports. You stay at the edge, holding towels, oil flasks, and sandals. Your body is good enough to use at home, not good enough to share the floor. If someone calls, you move. If someone throws something at you, you pick it up. Police in Athens are often public slaves too, many from Scythian origins, armed with bows. They can drag citizens to court. They can also hit you without anyone asking questions. You live in a city where even the slaves who carry whips outrank you. Still, there are tiny pockets of air. At the public fountain, you trade quick comments with other slaves. A joke, a complaint, a rumor about a kinder master in another house. Short moments, but they remind you that you are not the only one trapped in this system. Aging out of desired youth. Your value has an expiration date. In Athens, the ideal age for a beautiful male companion sits around the mid-teens to early 20s. Vase paintings from the late 6th and 5th centuries BCE show the same pattern. Young bodies get praised, older ones get ignored. You feel the shift the moment it starts. It begins small. Your owner calls you less often during meals. He asks another slave to pour wine at a symposium. Guests glance past you. The jokes that once targeted you for beauty now skip you entirely. Silence cuts deeper than insults. Your grooming routine changes. The expensive perfume disappears. The steward hands you cheap oil that smells like old olives. Your clothes become rougher. You lose access to the finer fabrics that marked you as a favorite. Each change is its own verdict. Tasks shift fast. You get moved toward general labor, cleaning floors, carrying wood, running errands alone. You are still in the house, but not in the center. The household needs bodies to work, not aging ornaments. The emotional change hits harder. Your owner treats you colder. He sees you as a reminder that he is getting older too. Greek men fear looking ruled by desire. Keeping an older male favorite makes people talk. Rival politicians use that line in court, accusing opponents of being controlled by aging lovers. No one wants that reputation. In some households, a younger slave replaces you. Everyone sees it. The whispers sting. You watch your former position handed to someone who looks the way you did 5 or 10 years ago. You feel bitterness rise, but you swallow it. Anger is dangerous. You may be sent to a workshop owned by the household. Shoemaking, pottery, metalwork. Skilled slaves can bring profit. If you have talent, a new path opens. But it is still under control. If not, you become simple labor, hauling goods or grinding grain. Some aging concubines end up supervising younger slaves. It sounds like a promotion. It is not. You become the guard dog for someone else's pleasure. Paths to manumission or lifelong bondage. Freedom becomes the new fantasy once beauty stops paying the bills. In Athens, manumission exists, but it is rare. Historians estimate only a small percentage of slaves ever gain it. Most stay enslaved until they die. You learn that fast. The first path is loyal service. Some owners free long-serving slaves in their wills. They like the idea of appearing generous after death. It costs them nothing at that point. Greek wills, recorded in inscriptions, show freed slaves gaining limited rights. They can marry, buy property, run a business. Sounds great until you read the fine print. Most freed slaves become metics, resident foreigners. They must pay a monthly metoikion tax and stay tied to their former owner as a patron. The law demands ongoing obedience. If you anger him, he can haul you into court. Freedom comes with a leash. Another path appears if your owner needs money. A skilled slave who brings profit is worth more free than idle. Some craftsmen buy their freedom slowly, paying fees over time. You do not earn wages, so good luck building savings. Maybe you pick up coins during errands or get tips from drunk guests. You hide every obol you find. If caught, it is theft. Emotional bonds sometimes help. A master who once adored you may decide to reward you. Do not trust it fully. Love fades, reputations shift, and heirs hate sharing inheritance with freed slaves. The family may block manumission or contest the will. Legal speeches by men like Isaiah show families fighting to keep slaves as property. There is a darker route, replacement. Once a new favorite enters the house, you become less risky. Freeing you makes space and reduces gossip. It is not kindness. It is household management. If freedom comes, it is public. A ceremony at a shrine or in front of witnesses records your new status. You get a name again, sometimes the one you were born with, sometimes the one your owner gave you. People call you apollutheros, freedmen. It feels huge. Then the rules hit. You cannot vote, hold office, or serve on juries. Citizenship stays locked away. Most concubines never reach this point. They age, work, weaken, and die in the household. A quiet burial, often without a marker. Memory, silence, and historical traces. When you die, there is no big scene, no public funeral, no long speech from a famous orator. You slip out of the house the way you lived in it, quietly. Someone wraps your body. Someone takes you to a grave outside the city walls. Maybe you get a simple marker, maybe not. Your owner's family moves on fast. They worry about dowries, property, and citizenship status. They do not argue over your legacy. The law does not care. Athenian records focus on citizen men, their land, and their lawsuits. You never appear on a voting list. You never appear on a jury roll. For the city, you barely existed. So where do we even find you? In fragments, in side comments, in places you were never meant to lead. Legal speeches give one line here and there. Aeschines or Demosthenes will throw in a jab about an opponent ruled by a slave or a favorite boy. You show up as an insult, not a person. Your body becomes courtroom trash talk. Comedy does it too. Playwrights like Aristophanes crack jokes about slave boys, foreign attendants, and spoiled house favorites. The audience laughs. They know the type. You are a punchline on stage because you are already a tool at home. Inscriptions sometimes list freed slaves by name. A few lines cut into stone. Who freed them? Which god witnessed it? What duties remain? If you were lucky enough to reach that status, your name might be there. Short, formal. No mention of what you actually lived through. Most concubines leave nothing written at all. No letters. No diaries. no direct voice. Modern historians dig through shards, speeches, and jokes to rebuild your world. So, your story survives in a strange way. Not through your own words, but through the traces of people who owned you, joked about you, and never asked what you thought. Your life was real. The record is the part that stayed small. The emperor is looking at you. Not at your credentials, not at your family name, not at anything you've accomplished, just at you. And in that moment, your entire future splits in two. One path leads to unimaginable wealth, palaces built in your honor, your family elevated to nobility overnight. The other path ends with you drinking poison in a prison cell, while soldiers dig up your grave to make sure you're actually dead. Both paths are the same path. That's the problem. Welcome to your new career as a male concubine in ancient China. Or, as the historians more delicately put it, a male favorite. The job pays extraordinarily well. Almost nobody survives it. You're not as unusual as you think. Here's the thing that might surprise you. In ancient China, particularly during the Han Dynasty, having a male lover wasn't scandalous. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't even particularly interesting gossip. According to historian Brett Hinch, who literally wrote the book on this subject, all 10 emperors who ruled the first 2 centuries of the Han Dynasty were openly bisexual, every single one of them. Your emperor isn't breaking any taboos by taking a fancy to you. He's following a tradition as old as the dynasty itself. The historian Sima Qian, writing in the records of the Grand Historian around 100 BCE, noted that courtiers and eunuchs could gain imperial favor through appearance and charm, just as well as women could. This wasn't a condemnation, just an observation. The official histories even have dedicated chapters listing each emperor's male favorites, complete with their names, backgrounds, and what gifts they received. Your name might end up in one of those chapters someday. Whether that's a good thing depends entirely on how your story ends. How you got here. So how does one become a male concubine to the Son of Heaven? There's no application process, no talent competition, no ancient Chinese equivalent of a reality dating show. The path varies. Sometimes it's pure accident, being in the wrong place at the right time. Take Deng Tong, who lived during the reign of Emperor Wen in the 2nd century BCE. Deng Tong was a nobody, a boat ferryman working near paths used by the imperial court, when the emperor had a peculiar dream. In this dream, Emperor Wen was trying to ascend to heaven but kept struggling to rise until a mysterious, yellow-headed man, with his belt tied at the back, pushed him upward. The emperor, being an emperor, launched a nationwide search for anyone matching this description. He found Deng Tong. Even better, Deng Tong's name sounded similar to the phrase, ascending smoothly, in Chinese. The emperor took this as a cosmic sign, and Deng Tong went from poverty to palace overnight, becoming one of the wealthiest men in the empire because someone dreamed about him. Your own story might be less mystical. Maybe you were a minor official, a clerk or secretary, and you caught the emperor's eye during routine palace business. That's what happened to Dong Xian, who started as a low-ranking secretary and ended up becoming the most powerful official in the empire simply because Emperor Ai saw him and liked what he saw. Maybe you're the brother of a beautiful woman who caught the emperor's attention first, and he decided your family had good genes. Li Yannian got his start this way. His sister became one of Emperor Wu's favorite consorts, and suddenly Li Yannian found himself running the Imperial Bureau of Music and spending every day and night by the emperor's side. The point is, you didn't apply for this job. The job applied for you. Your daily life in the palace. Let's say the emperor has taken a liking to you. What does your day actually look like? First, proximity is everything. Unlike other courtiers who must request audiences, who must navigate layers of bureaucracy and protocol just to glimpse the imperial presence, you have access, constant access. Historical records describe male favorites as not leaving the ruler's side, day or night. You sleep where the emperor sleeps. You wake when the emperor wakes. You accompany him to meals, to meetings, to those long, boring rituals where he has to stand around looking divine while priests chant for hours. Your living quarters have upgraded considerably. Instead of whatever cramped room you occupied before, you now reside in the inner palace, the part of the Forbidden City where only the emperor, his women, his eunuchs, and his favorites are allowed. The reason eunuchs dominate palace service is precisely to prevent any other men from having access to the emperor's consorts. But you're not a eunuch. You're the exception, the man who doesn't need to be castrated to enter the inner sanctum, because the emperor wants you intact. You don't have formal duties, per se. You're not managing anything. You're not commanding troops or drafting policy documents. Your job is to be pleasant company, to be there when the emperor wants to talk, to be silent when he wants quiet, to laugh at his jokes, to never, ever remind him that he's mortal and his decisions have consequences. The historian Ban Gu noted that many favorites didn't have any particular talents. They simply excelled at being agreeable. The perks are insane. Now let's talk about what you get out of this arrangement, because the compensation package is genuinely wild. Emperor Ai gave Dong Xian 10,000 pickles of grain per year, which is roughly equivalent to the income of a major noble estate. But that was just the beginning. Dong Xian's father was made a marquis, his younger brother received a government position, extended family members who had never met the emperor suddenly found themselves with titles and income. Slaves in the Dong household were given cash grants. The entire family moved to a new residence on the grounds of the imperial palace itself, built specifically for them at imperial expense. Deng Tong's perks went even further. Emperor Wen was so devoted to him that when a fortune teller predicted Deng Tong would die in poverty, the emperor decided to prove fate wrong by making Deng Tong unfathomably rich. He granted Deng Tong an entire copper mountain in Shu Commandery, along with the exclusive right to mint coins from it. This former boat ferryman who caught the emperor's attention through a dream, became so wealthy that his personal currency, called Deng Tong coins, became synonymous with money itself throughout the empire. His coins were famous for their quality, their shine, their consistent weight. The word for his coins basically became a word for money. Your family's fortunes rise with yours. That cousin who ignored you at family gatherings? He's very friendly now. That uncle who thought you'd never amount to anything? He's telling everyone he always knew you had potential. In ancient Chinese society, where family connections determine everything, becoming an imperial favorite doesn't just transform your life, it transforms your entire lineage. The awkward political reality. Here's where things get complicated. You're not just a romantic companion. Whether you intended it or not, you've become a political figure. Every minister, every general, every ambitious official who wants imperial favor now has to go through you. Historical records indicate that during certain reigns, all high ministers had to approach the emperor through his favorites. You control access to the most powerful person in the world. That makes you incredibly valuable to some people and incredibly dangerous to others. The court divides itself into factions. There are those who seek your patronage, who shower you with gifts and flattery, who name their children after you hoping you'll notice. And there are those who despise everything you represent, an unqualified pretty face-wielding influence that should belong to scholars and generals who earned their positions through merit and service. The Confucian officials, in particular, tend to view you as a symptom of everything wrong with imperial governance. You need to be careful here. The smart favorites cultivate relationships with powerful officials, building networks of mutual obligation that can protect them when circumstances change. The not-so-smart favorites alienate everyone, assuming the emperor's favor will last forever. Spoiler, it won't. The cut sleeve incident. Some context on that phrase you might have heard. The passion of the cut sleeve. It comes from a story about Dong Xian and Emperor Ai, and it tells you everything about how these relationships worked. One afternoon, Emperor Ai and Dong Xian were napping together in the imperial chambers. When the emperor woke up, he needed to rise for an audience with his ministers, but Dong Xian had fallen asleep with his head resting on the emperor's long silk sleeve. Rather than disturb his sleeping favorite, the emperor drew his sword and cut off his own sleeve, leaving Dong Xian to rest peacefully while he went to attend to matters of state. The story spread through the court immediately, as court gossip always does. But here's the interesting part. The reaction wasn't scandal or mockery. Instead, courtiers throughout the palace began cutting one of their own sleeves in imitation, turning it into a fashion statement. They were signaling their sophisticated appreciation for romantic gestures, aligning themselves with the emperor's values, maybe hoping to attract imperial attention themselves. The cut sleeve became a trend. This incident gave Chinese language one of its most enduring euphemisms for male same-sex love. Duan Xiu, the cut sleeve. 2,000 years later, the phrase still exists. The fashion consequences. Here's something the history books don't always emphasize. You're a trendsetter now. When Emperor Ai's courtiers started cutting their sleeves in imitation of his romantic gesture, they weren't just being sycophantic. They were participating in a broader phenomenon where male favorites set fashion standards for the entire court. Whatever you wear, however you style your hair, whatever accessories you favor, other ambitious young men will start copying you in hopes of catching imperial attention themselves. The records of the Grand Historian mentions that during one emperor's reign, courtiers began imitating the appearance and grooming of the current favorite, so aggressively that the palace was filled with a crowd of lookalikes. Everyone wanted to be the next Dong Xian, the next Deng Tong, the next man to catch the imperial eye and transform their family's fortunes overnight. This creates its own strange pressure. You can't just exist in the palace. You're being watched and imitated. Your preferences become trends. Your habits become fashionable. If you have a slight limp, expect to see courtiers affecting a similar gait within weeks. If you favor a particular shade of silk, the tailors will be swamped with orders for identical fabric. You're not just the emperor's companion. You're an influencer in the most literal sense, your every choice rippling outward through court society. Your predecessor, Mizi Xia and the leftover peach. The cut sleeve wasn't even the first such phrase. Long before the Han Dynasty, there was Mizi Xia and Duke Ling of Wei, whose relationship produced another famous idiom. Mizi Xia was strolling with the duke through the royal orchard when he bit into a peach and found it exceptionally sweet. Without thinking, he offered the remaining half to his sovereign, wanting to share the pleasure. Duke Ling was so moved by this gesture of intimate affection that he publicly acknowledged his love for Silla right there in the orchard. From this moment came the phrase, yu tao, the bitten peach or the leftover peach, another euphemism for male romantic love. The story has a darker coda though. Years later, when Xia had aged and fallen from favor, the duke used this same incident against him, complaining that Xia had once insulted him by offering leftover food. The same gesture that demonstrated love when the duke was smitten became evidence of disrespect once the duke's feelings changed. Remember that. Gestures don't have inherent meanings. Their interpretation depends entirely on how your emperor feels about you at the moment. The shared pillow tree. Not all stories of male love in ancient China ended in political tragedy. Some ended in something closer to romance, at least according to legend. The tale of Pyongyang and Wang Zhongxian describes two men who fell in love at first sight and were as affectionate as husband and wife, sharing the same coverlet and pillow with as much closeness as a married couple. They lived together openly, their relationship accepted by those around them. When they died, they were buried together, side by side. According to the story, a tree grew from their grave with branches that intertwined and embraced each other. Locals called it the shared pillow tree, and it became a symbol of devoted love that transcends death. Whether the story is historical fact or romantic embellishment, it tells you something about ancient Chinese attitudes. There was space for these relationships to be beautiful, not just scandalous. But you're not Pyongyang, you're not a private citizen whose love life is his own business. You're entangled with the emperor, which means you're entangled with the state, which means your love story has political stakes that could get you killed. When the emperor gets sick, your intimacy with the emperor extends to some genuinely unpleasant territories. Remember Deng, the former ferryman who became a coin-minting tycoon? When Emperor Wen developed a painful abscess that became infected, Deng personally sucked the pus out of it to prevent the infection from spreading. No hesitation, no visible disgust, just complete devotion to the emperor's well-being, even when that well-being required putting your mouth on a festering wound. The emperor was so touched by this that he decided to test his own son, the crown prince, Liu Qi. He asked the prince to do the same thing. The prince hesitated. He couldn't bring himself to do it. When the emperor told him that Deng had already done this multiple times without complaint, the prince felt humiliated and developed a burning resentment toward Deng that would have catastrophic consequences later. So yes, being a male favorite isn't all silk robes and private apartments. Sometimes it means medical procedures that would make a modern nurse quit on the spot. The question is, how devoted are you willing to appear? The entertainment value. Not all male favorites were mere companions. Some had genuine talents that served imperial purposes. Li Yannian was a castrated musician, originally employed in the Directorate of Palace Kennels, despite his gifts lying in music rather than dog breeding. When his sister caught Emperor Wu's attention and became a favored consort, Li Yannian's career prospects improved dramatically. Emperor Wu placed him in charge of the Imperial Bureau of Music, where he collected and arranged folk songs from across the empire for use in state rituals and imperial entertainment. Historical accounts describe Li Yannian as having a beautiful voice and considerable skill as a composer. He was talented and he was favored. The combination made him valuable in multiple ways. The emperor could enjoy his company and simultaneously benefit from his musical contributions to court culture. But even talent doesn't guarantee safety. After Li Yannian's sister died from complications of childbirth, the Li family fell out of favor. Li Yannian and his brother were accused of having inappropriate relationships with women at court, and both were executed. The accusations may have been true, or they may have been pretexts. When an emperor wants to be rid of someone, justifications can be manufactured. The fall from grace. Here's the part nobody tells you when you're first catching the emperor's eye. Almost none of this ends well. Dong Xian's story is perhaps the most dramatic. Emperor Ai loved him so intensely that on his deathbed, the emperor ordered his throne to be passed to Dong Xian, not to any member of the imperial family. He wanted his favorite to become emperor. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful man in China loved another man so much that he tried to give him the entire empire. The court rejected this immediately, of course. Grand Empress Dowager Wang seized the imperial seal, summoned her nephew Wang Mang back to the palace, and transferred command of the imperial guard away from Dong Xian. Within days, Dong Xian was stripped of his position, banned from the palace, and facing impeachment on charges of failing to properly attend to the dying emperor. He and his wife committed suicide. Wang Mang, the Empress Dowager's nephew who took power in the aftermath, had Dong Xian's grave dug up to verify he was actually dead, then reburied him in a prison cemetery. Dong Xian's male relatives were banished to the remote southern frontier. The man who had been the second most powerful figure in the empire went from that pinnacle to suicide in a matter of days. That's how fast it happens. The fortune teller was right. Remember Deng Tong and that fortune teller who predicted he'd die in poverty? Emperor Wen was so determined to prove the prediction wrong that he gave Deng Tong literal mountains of copper to mint into coins. It didn't matter. When Emperor Wen died, his son Emperor Qing took the throne. This was the same son who had been humiliated by not being able to suck pus from his father's abscess when Deng Tong had done it so willingly. Emperor Qing had been nursing that grudge for years. Almost immediately, Deng Tong was stripped of his official position. Then someone conveniently accused him of illegally smuggling his own coins beyond the imperial borders. Evidence was found. His assets were confiscated, leaving him not just poor but actually in debt to the state. The elder princess tried to help him, providing food and clothing as a loan, so it couldn't be seized, but even that kindness had its limits. Sima Qian recorded that Deng Tong died without a single copper coin to his name, as a dependent in someone else's home. The fortune teller had predicted exactly this outcome. All the emperor's love, all the mountains of copper, all the exclusive minting rights in the world couldn't change Deng Tong's fate once his imperial protector was gone. The philosophical indifference. Here's something that might comfort you, or might disturb you, depending on your perspective. Ancient Chinese philosophy really didn't care about your romantic life. Confucianism, the dominant ethical framework of imperial China, was primarily concerned with social harmony, filial piety, and proper relationships between ruler and subject, parent and child, husband and wife. It had surprisingly little to say about male same-sex relationships. As long as you fulfilled your family obligations, particularly the duty to produce heirs, what you did romantically was your own business. Most male favorites were married to women and had children. Their relationships with emperors existed alongside, not instead of, their heterosexual marriages. Buddhism, as it developed in China, was generally indifferent as well. The serious condemnation of homosexuality didn't really arrive until the Song Dynasty, around 960 CE, when scholars rediscovered a 6th century Indian Buddhist text that took a dimmer view of same-sex relationships. Before that rediscovery, you could enjoy imperial favor with a relatively clear conscience, at least religiously speaking. The danger to your soul wasn't theological, it was purely political. The succession problem. One of the consistent criticisms leveled against emperors with male favorites was neglect of the harem and, consequently, failure to produce heirs. Emperor Ai is the perfect example. The historian Ban Gu recorded that, by nature, Emperor Ai did not care for women. Unlike his predecessors, who maintained male favorites alongside extensive harems and multiple children, Emperor Ai never produced an heir. He died at around 25 years old, childless, and his attempt to pass the throne to Dongxian threw the dynasty into crisis. If you're a male favorite to an emperor who's neglecting his reproductive duties, you become a convenient scapegoat. You're the reason the empire lacks stability. You're the reason the succession is unclear. Never mind that the emperor's preferences are his own. The court needs someone to blame, and you're the obvious target. What the historians really thought. The ancient Chinese historians who recorded these relationships weren't moralists in the modern sense. They didn't condemn same-sex love as inherently wrong. But they did have concerns. Sima Qian's chapter on male favorites in the records of the Grand Historian reads as almost sympathetic, a collection of stories about opportunistic but misguided men who suffered misfortune through poor judgment. He wasn't criticizing them for loving men, he was criticizing them for loving power and not being careful enough about how they wielded it. Bangu, writing the Book of Han a century later, took a harsher view. He portrayed male favorites as scheming villains who threatened the survival of the dynasty. But even Bangu wasn't objecting to the romance itself. He was objecting to excessive favoritism, to emperors who let their personal relationships override their responsibilities to the state. Neither historian said same-sex love was wrong. They said unchecked favoritism was dangerous. The distinction matters. The eternal trade-off. So here you are, a male favorite in the Han Dynasty palace. What do you actually have? You have wealth beyond imagination. You have access to the most powerful person in the world. You have the ability to elevate your entire family, to place your relatives in positions of influence, to accumulate land and titles and treasuries full of jade. You have historians writing down your name, ensuring you'll be remembered for millennia. You also have a target on your back. Every ambitious official sees you as an obstacle. Every moralistic Confucian sees you as a symbol of imperial excess. Every empress dowager sees you as a threat to proper succession. Every future emperor might have a grudge against you that they're waiting to settle. Your survival depends entirely on one person's continued affection. The moment that affection fades, the moment that person dies, the moment political circumstances shift, everything you've built can collapse in days. Is it worth it? The men who lived this life never got to answer that question in retrospect. They chose their paths, accepted their risks, enjoyed their rewards, and faced their endings. Deng Tong died penniless. Dong Xian died by his own hand. Mizi Xia died forgotten after his duke turned against him. Li Yannian died executed on dubious charges. And yet, new favorites kept emerging with each new emperor. The rewards were too great, the temptation too strong. 2,000 years later, we're still talking about them. Their names are recorded, their stories resonate. In a strange way, they achieved a kind of immortality. But they didn't get to enjoy it. You arrive in the world in Seorabeol, capital of the Silla kingdom in early 7th century Korea. Hills surround the city. Royal tomb mounds rise nearby. Gold crowns and glass beads sit under the earth while you cry and kick on a wooden floor. You do not know it, but this city will control the southeast of the peninsula for centuries. Seorabeol is crowded for its time. Tens of thousands of people live inside and around the walls. Palace offices line the Wolseong area. Monks walk toward temple sites that will grow into huge complexes. Grain, iron, and cloth move through markets every day. From the start, you breathe air filled with dust, incense, and politics. Your parents are not farmers. They belong to the bone rank system, the frozen ladder that runs Silla. That system sorts every family into fixed ranks. Rank decides your office, your marriage options, your clothing, even the width of your house gate. Your birth is less acute event and more a line on a very strict chart. Officials track families in careful lists. At the top are sacred bone royals. Below them are true bone nobles. Under that sit layered head ranks. Each step down means fewer rights, smaller houses, and less access to real power. Colors on your clothes are controlled by this chart. Which saddle you sit on, which seat you take at a feast, which title you may dream of, all of it sits inside this system that started long before you and does not care about your feelings. You are probably in the true bone group or a very high head rank. That is the only way you will matter later. Servants move through the courtyard. Tutors visit. Your mother and father can read and write in classical Chinese, the script used for laws and state records. You will study it as soon as you can hold a brush without chewing it. Childhood still has games, but they are watched. You bow to older relatives in a set order. You learn who sits where at meals. You hear which cousin can marry into which branch of which clan. You see who lowers their eyes when a higher rank walks by. You grow up inside rules you did not vote for. The kingdom is training you for something. It has plans for that pretty, high-ranking skull of yours. Selected as elite flower youth. You hit your early teens and suddenly adults start staring at your face a lot. Not in a loving parent way, in a recruitment way. Silla needs new Hwarang, and the kingdom likes them young, noble, and annoyingly good-looking. Scouts from high families and officials look over boys from true bone and top head ranks. They check manners, posture, and how you move in a crowded hall. You are watched at feasts, in family rituals, even during archery practice. Your life turns into one long audition. The record from a Chinese envoy in Silla describes young nobles with powdered faces, fine clothes, and people crowding around them in public. The envoy did not invent that. He wrote what he saw in the 7th century. Hwarang are not a myth. They are documented. Real teenage elites who stand out in crowds because of rank, clothes, and very deliberate grooming. Your mother and attendants lean into the moment. Hair gets longer and smoother. Robes upgrade from normal, noble to peak fashion. Colors and patterns still follow bone rank rules, but they now push right to the edge of what the law allows. You are being styled for the role. Then comes the decision. A leading figure chooses you and a few other boys to form or join a Hwarang group. Each group has a central Hwarang leader, and many followers called Nangdo. Buddhist monks and court elders advise them, you are no longer just a noble child. You are now part of a state-approved youth corps. There is a ritual element. Sources describe Hwarang associated with sacred mountains, with Maitreya, and with songs and processions. Your group receives a name. You swear loyalty to king, parents, friends. You agree to fight when called. You nod along as if this is normal teenage life. From that day on, you walk through Seorabeol as a marked person. You are Silla property. The kingdom has taken your bone rank, your face, and your nerves, and turned them into a public symbol called Flower Youth. Learning the 5 Commandments. Your new life as a Flower Youth starts in a lecture hall, not on a battlefield. You want a sword? You get a monk with a calm voice and a long list. Violence can wait. First, they rewire your brain. The monk writes 5 lines. These are the famous 5 commandments for secular life. You will hear them so often they might as well be tattooed on your skull. Be loyal to the king. Be filial to your parents. Be faithful to your friends. Never retreat in battle. Be careful when taking life. The rules sound simple. They are not. Loyalty to the king means you do not just serve the throne. You serve the current body in the royal seat, even if court politics get dirty. Filial piety means you obey parents who may trade your future for family gain. Faith with friends means you do not betray the guy who might drag you into a suicidal charge. Never retreat means stand firm when every part of you wants to run. Be careful taking life. is the soft voice trying to stand up to all the others. You repeat each line. The monk drills you with questions. What if the king is wrong? What if your friend is a coward? What if saving your parents means breaking a law? You are not just asked to memorize. You are forced to rank your values, then live with the order. Behind the monk's back is a second layer: Confucian virtues, humaneness, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, trustworthiness. You read short passages from older Chinese texts. You copy them in careful brushstrokes, ink on paper, then ink on habit. You learn that a real Hwarang is not only beautiful and brave, he is supposed to be a walking moral ad for Silla. People will judge the kingdom by how you act in a market, in a temple, in a tavern, in a trench. No pressure. There are moments of dark comedy. You and your friends swear to never retreat, then almost faint standing too long in full gear under the sun. You promise to be pure and noble, then gossip about who cried during practice. The kingdom wants saints and heroes. It gets teenagers with homework and very sharp weapons on the way. Nature trips and spiritual training. You wake up before sunrise and someone is already yelling about mountains. Welcome to the next stage of flower youth life. The kingdom has fed you ethics. Now it wants your body, your breath, and your free time. Your group moves out of Scapegoats in a long line, robes hitched up, boots on, bows and small drums slung over shoulders. This is Pengwaldo, the way of wind and moon, a mix of hiking trip, field school, and spiritual boot camp. You are going to sacred peaks, river bends, and shrines marked long before your birth. You travel with monks, older attendants, and other Hwarang. There are songs for the road. There are rules for when you can talk and when you should stay silent. The land itself is a classroom. Every valley and ridge comes with a story about kings, battles, or spirits that do not like to be ignored. At a mountain site, the schedule flips from noble comfort to controlled discomfort. You chant sutras. You bow until your thighs shake. You hold still in meditation while legs cramp and bugs crawl on your skin. Then you stand up to practice forms, stances, and breathing drills. No one calls this vacation. It is state-sponsored character building. The view is great. The expectations are higher. On rest breaks, you compose short verses. Some praise Maitreya, the future Buddha. Some praise the king. Some quietly complain about the blisters. Senior Hwarang, check your wording for respect. Monks check it for doctrine. Everyone checks that you are still upright. Nights are another test. Fires burn low. Stories roll out about earlier Hwarang who became generals or died young and glorious. You listen, half proud and half alarmed. You come home from each journey thinner, tougher, and slightly less impressed with comfort. Weapons, horses, and battle drills. Your sword dreams finally pay off. Training shifts from chanting on mountains to sweating on fields outside Scapegoats. The ground shakes with hooves. The air smells like leather, oil, and teenage panic. You are now learning how to turn your pretty face into a state weapon. Instructors do not care about your poetry skills. They care about how fast you draw a blade and how long you can hold a shield. You start with archery, the pride of Silla forces. Composite bows hit targets at serious range. Miss too many shots and the instructor looks at you like you are wasting royal resources. Then come spears, long shafts, iron heads, drills in tight lines. A spear wall keeps cavalry away and breaks infantry charges. You learn to thrust, step, and keep formation. Someone always forgets their stepping rhythm and hits a friend. The instructor solves this with more drills and louder shouting. Mounted training is the real prize. Horses are expensive. Only high-ranked troops get to ride. You climb up, try to look noble, then nearly fall off when the horse decides it dislikes you. Instructors teach you to fight from the saddle, control speed, and stay upright during sudden turns. This skill turns elite youth into battlefield leaders. Without it, you stay in the mud with everyone else. Armor fittings take time. You wear lamellar plates tied together, heavy enough to feel, light enough to move. You practice walking, running, and breathing under the weight. Every day ends with sore shoulders and bruises in places you did not know existed. Formations become your new religion. Lines, wedges, flanks, signal flags, drum beats. You learn to follow orders fast. You learn to hold position when arrows start flying. The 5 commandments echo again. Never retreat. That rule feels different once you see arrows embedded in wooden targets. There are glimpses of future legends. Older Hwarang talk about Kim Yu-sin, a young noble rising through ranks who will command massive armies. His name spreads through training fields like a rumor of greatness. You try not to panic at the thought of fighting under someone famous. First skirmishes on the frontier. Orders arrive. You are sent out of Scapegoats with a unit of Hwarang and Nangdo followers. No more drills. No more safe targets. The 3 kingdoms are locked in border fights. Silla wants control of key passes near the Han River Valley in the 630s. Baekje and Goguryeo want the same ground. You are now part of the struggle. Your first task is patrol duty, long marches through valleys and forest roads. Villages sit half empty, farmers watch from doorways. They know armies move here. They know raids come fast. You move quietly, bow in hand, armor creaking, trying to look calm. The first clash is small. Scouts see movement. Your commander signals. Arrows fly. You hear a scream. This is not training. Bodies fall and stay down. Your stomach drops. You remember the rule to never retreat. You also remember that the enemy does not care about your moral code. Border fights are messy. Records show many small engagements long before the big wars of 660. These skirmishes decide supply lines, road control, and morale. You are part of teams guarding mountain passes and river crossings. A lost patrol can lead to a larger attack. Your unit protects traders, messengers, and grain carts. The kingdom runs on that grain. Losing it starves armies. Losing roads isolates forts. State survival rests on young fighters who barely know how to sleep in armor. You learn fast. Fires stay small. Camp talk stays quiet. You rotate watch shifts. You track footprints in mud. You learn which trails can hide an ambush. You hate fog. It hides movement and makes every tree look like an attacker with a spear. There are brutal lessons. One skirmish ends with a friend hit by an arrow. He bleeds out within minutes. Training never covered the part where he calls for help, and no healer arrives. You hold the line because the commander orders it. The fight ends. He does not get back up. Campaigns in the Unification Wars. You return home for a short break. Then history knocks. The year is 660. Silla forms a major alliance with Tang China. Yes, the empire with huge armies and shiny bureaucracy. The goal is simple: crush Baekje in the southwest. After that, knock down Goguryeo in the north. You are now a tiny piece in a massive plan. The army gathers near the western front. Tens of thousands of Silla troops move with Tang fleets and soldiers. Supply wagons stretch for miles. Officers shout orders that echo across fields. You march toward Baekje territory, feeling both proud and terrified. This is no border fight. This is a kingdom-ending event. Baekje has strong fortresses. The famous one is Sabi. Tang ships attack by river. Silla forces attack on land. You help cut off roads and block food deliveries. Records note the fall of Baekje in 660 after a fast collapse once leaders surrendered. Ordinary soldiers fight on, but leadership cracks. The kingdom ends. You watch nobles dragged away, their royal line broken. The next target is Goguryeo, a fortress-loving powerhouse in the north. It takes years. Major assaults in 661 fail. Goguryeo walls hold. Disease hits troops. Supplies strain. Records mention harsh winters and heavy losses. You march again in 667 with new forces. In 668, Goguryeo finally falls after internal betrayal and combined attacks. The unification of the peninsula under Silla becomes real. You are there for the grind, the hunger, and the siege smoke. Your role is support and control. You lead units that secure captured towns. You escort envoys. You carry messages between commanders and Tang officers. You also try to stop looting by angry troops. Good luck with that. War brings out the worst in everyone. You see how alliances feel on the ground. Tang officers treat Silla troops like junior partners. Some Silla commanders resent it. You hear arguments over who gets credit. You also hear whispers that Tang wants more than a friendly Korea. You keep your head down. You want to live long enough to retire. Victories come with cost. Soldiers freeze in northern winds. Disease spreads in camps. Food shortages kill more men than arrows. You bury friends without markers. Government administration rules. You come home from war expecting rest. The kingdom has other plans. Unified Silla needs officials, not wandering veterans. Your bone rank makes you eligible for real office. Congratulations! You survive battle long enough to become a paperwork machine. You enter the central bureaucracy in Gyeongju. Offices fill the palace district. Clerks copy records in classical Chinese. Officials debate tax rights and land grants. The sound of war drums disappears. The sound of brushes on bamboo slips replaces it. Your first job is not glamorous. You supervise land registers in a district. Silla controls new territories after 668. Someone must count fields, households, and grain. That someone is you. You travel with escorts, visit villages, check who owns what, and mark it down. You never imagined your life would hinge on rice tallies. The bone rank system controls your career ceiling. True bone nobles hold the highest offices. Head ranks fill lower posts. Records show strict limits on titles and authority tied to rank. You cannot rise above your birth level, no matter how many battles you survive or how smart you are. Promotion charts look less like merit and more like a locked staircase. It does not matter that you fought at Baekje or marched north in winter. Birth still beats effort. Meetings drain your patience. Governors report crop failures. Temple officials request exemptions. Local elites complain about taxes. You learn fast that civil rule is messy. Wars end kingdoms. Bureaucracy preserves them. Your military past follows you. Soldiers salute you in towns. Villagers treat you like a hero. That fades once you order higher taxes or deny petitions. Nothing kills admiration faster than enforcing state policy. You write reports for the Central Council. You review cases of land disputes. You send recommendations to ministers. Some get approved. Some vanish in the palace maze. You begin to understand that power is not just orders. Power is paperwork that actually reaches someone who cares. Years pass. You gain skill. You gain weight. You lose patience. Deepening Buddhist ties and patronage. Your hair starts to gray. Your knees complain about stairs. The court still pulls you in, but your heart drifts toward temples. Silla is a Buddhist kingdom in full bloom. Monks shape politics, culture, and public life. You spent your youth chanting on mountains. Now you return to those lessons with fewer arrows flying at your head. You visit great temples in Gyeongju. Hwangryongsa rises as one of the largest complexes in East Asia. Sources mention a 9-story wooden pagoda built in the 7th century. Architects brag about the height. You stare up and feel your neck pop. Monks claim it protects the kingdom. You hope it protects your back. Donations become part of your routine. Land, grain, cloth, labor. You give because it helps the soul, and because officials respect generous patrons. Temples feed travelers, teach children, and host rituals for national protection. You want good karma and good politics. You sponsor a small shrine near your home. Records show nobles donating slaves, farmland, and gold items to temples. Some donations earn carved names on stone or wood. You like that idea. Your younger self wanted glory in battle. Your older self wants his name spelled correctly on a pillar. Monks recognize you from earlier campaigns. They remember sending blessings to troops. They now offer advice on aging and discipline. You trade stories. They tell you about meditation practice. You tell them about sieges where meditation meant not screaming while rocks hit the walls. You attend memorial rituals for fallen friends. Drums echo in halls. Incense burns thick. You hear names read aloud. Some belong to boys who never reached adulthood. Teaching becomes part of your role. Young nobles ask about virtue and duty. You talk about loyalty, then mention the cost. You talk about never retreating, then mention the graves. At home, you keep a small altar. You light candles. You chant short verses. You feel calmer than you did in government halls. The kingdom still demands service, but you now serve something larger than a throne. Decline of Hwarang status and meaning. Your joints hurt. Younger officials call you respected elder, with the same tone they use for old furniture. The court changes fast. New factions rise. Old heroes fade. The worst part is what happens to the title you carried like armor. Hwarang no longer means elite warrior youth. It starts to mean something closer to pretty boy, with time to waste. Records from later unified Silla show the shift. Court writers complain that young Hwarang focus on songs, dances, and flirting instead of military skill. Monasteries still bless them, but commanders stop trusting them in real campaigns. The core becomes symbolic while real power moves to generals and ministers who did not grow up chanting on mountaintops. Your blood pressure spikes when you hear a merchant call a traveling performer a Hwarang. The term spreads to entertainers, shamans' husbands, even idle nobles who dress well but never train. Historical texts note this decline clearly. The once respected flower youth institution slowly turns into a label for fashionable layabouts. You survived sieges and watched kingdoms fall. Now, street gossip uses your title as a joke. The insult lands harder than any spear. You meet a new generation of nobles. They admire the legends but avoid the discipline. They complain about early mornings and armor weight. They hold lutes instead of bows. They pose for crowds and call it duty. You stare and wonder if the kingdom deserves whatever happens next. Court politics fracture. Royal assassinations and rebellions shake the palace. You watch as powerful families fight for control. The once unified state strains under corruption and regional tensions. You recognize the warning signs. You saw Baekje collapse when leadership faltered. You remember Goguryeo falling after internal betrayal. Now you see similar cracks at home. You spend more time at temples. Fewer young nobles show up for training trips. They prefer parties in the capital. Monks sigh. You sigh harder. You sit outside your home and watch the sun hit the royal tomb mounds. You once walked as a symbol of Silla strength. Now you watch the symbol dissolve, while you stay very real, very tired, and painfully aware that the kingdom forgot what made it strong. You are property. That is the first thing you need to understand about your new life. Not a person, not a subject of the great kingdom of Egypt, not even a particularly interesting footnote in history. You are an asset. A living, breathing, thinking asset who will have opinions and preferences and probably a few thoroughly understandable grievances, but an asset nonetheless. Welcome to the royal harem of ancient Egypt. Try not to touch anything. Before we go any further, let us be very clear about what the word harem actually means, because if you are picturing something out of a Victorian painting, with gauzy curtains and women eating grapes, while a dramatically backlit sultan broods in the corner, you have been misled by about 2,000 years of Orientalist fantasy. The ancient Egyptian royal harem, known as the Ipit Nessut, or sometimes the Perkeneret, was less a den of erotic indulgence and more a sprawling administrative compound that happened to contain a lot of women. Think less, Scheherazad's pleasure palace and more, a very well-funded semi-enclosed government department, with perfume, and politics. A genuinely lethal amount of politics. How you got here, the path that brought you to this place was, almost certainly, not a pleasant one. Let us survey the options, because ancient Egypt was an equal opportunity enslaver of foreign peoples. Option 1. You were captured in war. Egypt under the New Kingdom pharaohs was a military empire of considerable ambition, and those ambitions generated enormous quantities of prisoners. Ramesses II, who ruled for 67 years and had no concept of personal restraint in any area of his life, conducted campaigns into Nubia, Libya, the Levant, and Hittite territories. When the armies came home, they brought people with them. The Egyptians called war captives squor ankh, meaning living prisoners, perhaps the most bureaucratically chilling term for a human being ever devised. You were processed, categorized, assigned. Option 2. You were purchased. Ancient Egypt participated in a Mediterranean slave trade that moved people across remarkable distances. If you were young, could sing or dance or play music, or had attributes someone along the chain of custody considered palace-worthy, you were bought, cleaned up, and sent upriver to wherever the royal household was residing that season. Option 3. You were born into it. Your mother was in palace service, so you are in palace service. The tidiest origin story from an administrative standpoint, you have grown up inside these walls, you know the rules, and you have had your entire childhood to make peace with the fact that this is your life. Option 4. You are a foreign princess. This sounds more glamorous until you realize that a foreign princess sent to join the pharaoh's household is an extremely well-dressed hostage. Your father made a political alliance and sealed it by sending you to court. You were given a title, assigned quarters in a palace compound, and never, under any circumstances, allowed to go home. Amenhotep III received a Mitannian princess named Tatakipa in this fashion. She was given everything she could want and absolutely no option to decline. Egypt was very good at making captivity comfortable. However you arrived, here you are. Let us figure out where exactly you fit. The hierarchy. The royal harem is not a flat organization. Nothing in ancient Egypt is flat. Egyptian society runs on hierarchy the way the Nile runs on water, and the palace household is no exception. At the very top sits the great royal wife, the principal queen, whose name appears in royal cartouches alongside the pharaohs, whose children are the presumptive heirs. Under Ramesses II, this was Nefertari. You do not approach her unless invited. You do not make eye contact unless invited. You probably do not breathe loudly in her vicinity without an invitation. Below the great royal wife come the secondary queens, women of royal or noble birth, who hold the title of king's wife. Without the supreme position, they have their own apartments, servants, and administrators, and spend a meaningful portion of their time competing, through their sons, for influence over the succession. It is recreational and professional simultaneously. Below them come the concubines, officially recognized companions of the pharaoh who do not hold the title of wife. Ramesses II reportedly had around 200 concubines. 200. At that volume, you are not dealing with intimate relationships. You are dealing with a staffing situation. Below the concubines come the servants, attendants, musicians, dancers, hairdressers, weavers, kitchen staff, and nurses. This is most likely where you are. Not because I am being uncharitable, but because statistically, for every concubine who attracts the pharaoh's personal attention, there are dozens of women making sure she has somewhere clean to sit when he arrives. Your daily life, the compound, is not cramped. The ancient Egyptians understood that unhappy people in close quarters produce spectacular dysfunction, and they built accordingly. Your section has sleeping quarters, a garden, storage rooms, a kitchen, and common areas where the women gather to work, socialize, and produce gossip of a quality that professional intelligence services would pay extremely well for today. You wake before dawn because that is when Egypt wakes. The heat of the day comes fast and stays long, and the Egyptians organized their entire civilization around accomplishing things before the sun decides to get serious about killing you. You wash. Fresh water is brought. You have natron for cleaning, oils to protect skin from the relentless desert dryness, kohl for the eyes, because eye makeup is not vanity in ancient Egypt. It protects against sun glare and the eye infections that are a regular visitor in this part of the world. Appearing well-groomed is a professional requirement. Dishevelment is not a personality here, it is a demotion. Your clothing is linen. The quality of your linen is one of the more reliable indicators of your status. Lowest servants wear rough, undyed fabric. Women close to the pharaoh wear linen so fine it is nearly transparent, pleated with precision that requires either extraordinary skill or extraordinary patience. You are somewhere in the middle, functional, reasonably comfortable, and clearly communicating your rank to anyone who looks. Breakfast is bread and beer. The bread is the foundation of Egyptian life. The beer is not what you are imagining. Thick, nutrient, dense, low in alcohol, consumed by virtually everyone, including children, because unprocessed Nile water is a biological adventure nobody wants. There is also dried fruit, onions, fish, when supply is good. You eat reliably, which is more than can be said for a large portion of the population outside these walls. Your work, you have a function. Every person in this compound has one, because an enclosed community of this size does not sustain itself on air and divine favor. If you were selected for musical ability, your day is built around practice and performance. Musicians played at religious rituals, banquets, and ceremonies, marking everything from the king's birthday to the flooding of the Nile. The instruments include harps, lutes, sistrums, double flutes, and percussion. A skilled musician is a specialist with better job security than a generalist. Your hands are not calloused. You are, in the language of modern employment, a skilled creative professional. The fact that you did not choose this career is beside the point. If you were placed in closer proximity to the pharaoh's personal attention, your work is performance of a different kind. The pharaoh is a god king. His attention is not simply personal desire, it carries genuine cosmic weight in the religious and political framework of ancient Egypt. Children you produce are potential anchors of political stability. A son could become a prince could become a pharaoh. You understand, or quickly learn, that your body is not simply yours, it is a political instrument. The pharaoh does not necessarily visit you often. Under Ramesses II, with his 200 concubines, and 12 or so documented wives, the mathematics of his personal attention are not in your favor. There are women who have lived here for 20 years and met the king exactly twice. There are women who arrived as young girls and grew into old age inside these walls without ever being the subject of particular royal interest. If you are a domestic attendant, a nurse, a weaver, or kitchen worker, your day is full of the labor keeping the compound functioning. You wash garments in ceramic basins. You tend the gardens, real gardens with trees and pools and flowers, because the Egyptians understood that people kept in entirely functional spaces without beauty become angry and difficult to manage. You care for royal children being shaped into the future ruling class of one of the most powerful civilizations on earth. You are the person making sure they ate their bread this morning. The pharaoh himself, at some point, you will see him, maybe often, maybe rarely, maybe once and never again. The pharaoh is simultaneously more and less than you expect. He is more because the spectacle of Egyptian royal presentation is genuinely overwhelming. When Ramesses II appeared in formal ceremony, he wore the double crown representing Upper and Lower Egypt, the crook and flail of divine authority, a kilt of pleated white linen, and a broad Yusek collar of gold and faience that probably caused neck problems. He was attended by fans, priests, and soldiers. The effect was intentional. He was not merely a king but the living Horus, the son of Ra, the earthly anchor of the divine order that kept the universe from collapsing into chaos. He is less because he is also a man. Ramesses II fought the Hittites at Kadesh and spent the next several decades commissioning propaganda, claiming it as a complete victory. He had arthritis in his later years, dental abscesses, and outlived most of his children. The god king who held the cosmos together spent his 90s dealing with a succession he had failed to properly secure across 67 years of trying. Your interactions with him are governed by protocols so precise that any deviation can constitute a punishable offense. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not stand when you should kneel. You do not meet his eyes with the casualness of an equal. The hierarchy defining your position exists everywhere, at all times, enforced by the genuine belief of everyone around you that some humans are closer to the divine than others, and this proximity must be respected. The political dimension. Here is where things get interesting. Here interesting means dangerous. The royal harem is not a politically neutral space. It is one of the most politically charged environments in the ancient world, because every woman who has produced a son is also the mother of a potential pharaoh. Every woman who wants to produce a son has excellent motivation to make other women's sons less viable candidates. The politics of succession are vicious, creative, and frequently fatal. The royal harem gives those politics a venue, a population, and plenty of time to develop. The most famous example went very badly in the reign of Ramesses III. We know about it from the Judicial Papyrus of Turin, an 18-foot-long legal scroll that records a plot to assassinate the pharaoh from within his own harem. The woman at the center was one of Ramesses III's secondary wives, named Ta. She wanted her son Pentawar on the throne. She recruited palace officials, military officers, harem administrators, and people from outside the palace walls. The plot was discovered. Many conspirators were executed. Some were compelled to suicide. Several received the particularly Egyptian punishment of having their names changed to insults in the official record, which is the ancient equivalent of being permanently cancelled. The conspiracy may have actually succeeded in killing Ramesses III. Recent forensic examination of his mummy found a deep throat wound consistent with a blade attack. The conspirators won the assassination and lost everything else, which is the kind of spectacular political failure that only the highest stakes environments can produce. You are not involved in this conspiracy. You are not going to be involved in any conspiracy. You are going to keep your head down and your opinions to yourself, because the women who get swept into palace intrigue in ancient Egypt do not have outcomes anyone would envy. What you understand, living here, is that the walls have ears in a very literal sense. Officials exist specifically to administer and surveil this compound. Information flows in ways that are not always visible to you. Someone is always watching. This is not paranoia. This is the correct reading of your environment, your soul in this place. You are not allowed to be only a body here. The ancient Egyptians would find that concept baffling. You have a soul, multiple souls, actually. Your ka, your life force, your ba, something like your individual spirit, depicted as a bird with a human head. Your ren, your name, which is a genuine part of your identity that can be destroyed by erasing it. Your heart, which will be weighed against the feather of Ma'at when you die. Hathor, the goddess of love, music, beauty, and feminine power, is particularly relevant to your situation. She is also the goddess of the underworld, which speaks to the Egyptian understanding that feminine power encompasses joy and terror in approximately equal measure. You make offerings, you pray, you participate in religious festivals marking the agricultural calendar, the movements of the stars, the anniversaries of royal events. The afterlife is a real destination in your cosmology. The Shaptis, small figurines, intended to perform agricultural labor in the afterlife on your behalf. The spells from the Book of the Dead, these reflect a genuine and elaborate theology about what happens after this life ends. If you maintained Ma'at, the balance and harmony that is the central Egyptian virtue, you have a legitimate shot at the field of reeds, which is basically a perfect version of Egypt with better growing conditions and no succession politics. People who have meaningful hope in difficult circumstances are harder to break than people who do not. The compound itself, the major royal harem compounds, were not simple enclosures. They were substantial settlements. The palace complex at Malkata, built by Amenhotep III, covered an area that included separate palaces for his principal wife, festival halls, pools, gardens, storerooms, and the administrative buildings required to run what was essentially a small city. The site at Medinet El Ghurab in the Fayum provides the clearest archaeological picture of a dedicated harem compound, a walled settlement with weaving workshops, storage for rations, and residential quarters for a diverse population of Egyptian and foreign women. The weaving workshops were significant industrial operations. The place where you live is also a production facility. Your physical quarters depend on rank. Highest status women have apartments with antechambers, storage areas, bathing facilities. The walls are plastered and painted with scenes from nature in vivid colors: cobalt blue, golden yellow, green. The Egyptians believed beautiful environments produced better outcomes and applied this philosophy consistently. Your meals are regular. The palace kitchens handle enormous quantities of grain, fish from the Nile, vegetables, dates, figs, pomegranates, meat on special occasions. You eat reliably. The compound has access to physicians. Egyptian medicine is sophisticated by ancient standards. It will not save you from a serious infection the way modern medicine can, but it is substantially better than what ordinary Egyptians have access to. Aging inside the walls. Time passes differently inside enclosed spaces, but it passes. What happens to you as you age depends on what you produced while you were here. If you bore the pharaoh, a son who survived and rose to prominence, you have something. You are the mother of a prince. This is a status that does not expire. People want things from you because your son may one day control everything, and those who were kind to his mother early enough will be remembered. If you did not bear a son, your aging is a quieter thing. You become part of the fabric of the place. A woman who has always been here, who knows the customs and the personalities. Younger arrivals come to you for orientation. This is not a glamorous position. It is not a powerless one either. Women who have been somewhere long enough accumulate authority that operates below the official hierarchy. When a pharaoh died and a new king took the throne, the existing harem women remained in the compound, supported by the state, their status now defined by connection to a former king. This is simultaneously a form of safety and a form of irrelevance. You are protected. You are also no longer central to anything that is happening. The exit options: you are not a prisoner in any simple legal sense, but leaving is not straightforward. The options are more limited than they appear. Marriage is one route out, but the pool of men with access to harem women is controlled by the pharaoh. He could, and occasionally did, grant women in marriage to officials or allies as rewards or political gestures. The woman being married was not necessarily consulted at length. You might move from one form of household dependency to another, but at least you would be in a smaller household with a clearer position. Manumission, formal freeing from slave status, existed in ancient Egypt. Slaves could gain freedom through demonstrated loyalty or exceptional service. The path was narrow and depended on circumstances outside your control. Some palace servants were eventually freed and rose to positions of genuine trust. The records mention it rarely enough that it reads as exceptional rather than routine. Death is, as always, the most reliable exit. In the context of ancient Egyptian belief, this is genuinely not meant to sound grim. The field of reeds is waiting. If you maintained Ma'at through an unreasonable situation with even reasonable ethical care, dying is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a significantly better chapter, with much better weather and no succession politics. What Egypt thought it was doing. The Egyptians did not think of the royal harem in the terms we might use today. They were not, in their own view, running a system of exploitation dressed in administrative language. They were maintaining the royal household in the manner appropriate to a god-king, ensuring dynastic continuity, managing the complex web of political alliances that foreign marriages created. That framework does not make your situation comfortable, or just by any standard applied from outside it. But the people who built and ran this institution were not thinking of themselves as villains. They were administrators of an essential royal function. The distance between "this is a necessary institution" and "this requires the subordination of hundreds of women's choices" was not a distance the ancient Egyptians were equipped to see, partly because their cultural framework lacked the conceptual tools, and partly because institutions that benefit their operators are rarely examined with uncomfortable honesty by those operators. The women of the royal harem were not without agency. They made choices within available constraints. They formed relationships, created hierarchies, raised children, created music and textiles, navigated one of the most treacherous political environments on earth. Some shaped history directly. The mothers of pharaohs were often actively involved in making that happen. The woman who orchestrated the harem conspiracy failed, but she failed at something enormously difficult, requiring substantial capability to even attempt. You sometimes hear the world beyond the walls, the sounds of the city, the river traffic, the festival crowds, when the great religious celebrations move through Thebes or Memphis. Out there, ordinary Egyptians farm the black soil of the Nile floodplain, fish the river, work in city workshops. Their lives are harder than yours in material terms. They face hunger when the flood is insufficient. They face conscription into the labor gangs that build the monuments you can see from the upper story of your quarters. Their lives are freer in ways that matter. They can walk out of their houses. They can go home. You live in extraordinary material circumstances, inside extraordinary personal constraints. The trade-off is real, and nobody asked you to make it. Egypt made that calculation for you. What remains? You will not leave records of your own. The women of the royal harem exist in the historical record as aggregate statistics, entries in supply lists, brief mentions in the biographical inscriptions of their sons. The judicial papyrus of Turin preserved Ta's name because she tried to commit regicide. Your name will sink into the administrative silence of 3,000 years. But you were here. The linen you wove was worn. The music you played was heard. The children you tended grew up, and some of them, inevitably, changed history. The pharaoh whose household you belong to is now one of those enormous statues that tourists photograph in the sunlight. His nose is probably missing. Ramesses II built the Abu Simbel temples with 4 seated figures of himself, each 66 feet tall, oriented, so that twice a year the rising sun illuminated the inner sanctuary at exactly the right angle to light up the faces of the gods inside, except for the god of the underworld, who was deliberately kept in shadow, because even ancient Egyptian architects had a sense of theater. And somewhere in the shadow of all that stone, in the supply lists and the administrative papyri and the tiny details that archaeologists spend careers teasing out of the ground, you are there. Not as a queen, not as a concubine whose name made the records, as a presence in a system that required your presence to function, in a civilization that built its monuments on the structured labor of people who did not have the luxury of declining to participate. But here you are in the palace, in the Perkeneret, in the Ipit Nessut. You wash your face in the morning. You apply your kohl, you eat your bread and drink your beer and go to your work and navigate the extraordinary complexity of being a human being inside a system that thought of you primarily as a resource. You maintain Ma'at, you do what you can with what you have. The feather of Ma'at is waiting, and if you have lived with even reasonable ethical care in an unreasonable situation, you have more than a fair shot at the field of reeds. Try not to get involved in any conspiracies on your way out. The emperor falls asleep on your sleeve. He needs to leave. He cuts the sleeve off the imperial robe rather than wake you, walks out of the chamber barefoot, and the entire Han court spends the next morning trying to figure out which of you he is in love with this week. The robe ends up in the imperial wardrobe with a hole in it. The hole becomes a vocabulary word. 2,000 years later, in modern Chinese, the cut sleeve is still the polite literary term for two men in a relationship. You are the man on the other end of that sleeve. Today you find out exactly what your job description looked like, what it paid, and how, in a kingdom of millions, you ended up sleeping in a corner of the most powerful bedroom on earth. The job has more than one name. Classical Chinese has a small library of euphemisms for what you are. The bitten peach, the cut sleeve, the fashion of Long Yang, the shared bed, the spring of Anlei. Each of these phrases comes from a specific named historical incident. Each one ends in someone falling out of favor and dying badly, but the phrasing stays in the language and gets recycled by poets for the next 20 centuries. Chinese culture has been documenting your job description, with footnotes, since roughly the 6th century BC. The technical term for the institution itself is bxing, often translated as favored minions, which is what the imperial historians call you when they want to be slightly disapproving. The men of the Beijing are listed in dedicated chapters of the official histories. Sima Qian, the historian who got castrated for defending a general in 99 BC and then wrote the Records of the Grand Historian to spite the world, included an entire section called the Lives of the Favorites. Ban Gu, who finished the Book of Han a century later, included his own version. These are official imperial documents. Every literate official in China for 2,000 years had access to a paragraph that described, by name, the men who had been the favorites of the previous dynasty's emperors. Your job is, in administrative terms, weirdly well documented. The emperors had wives. They had official concubines, sometimes hundreds of them, organized into ranks with formal titles. They also had you, and the texts use a different vocabulary for you on purpose. You are not a concubine in the legal sense, because legal concubines could produce heirs. You are a favorite. Your category is different and your power is different. You sit somewhere between trusted personal staff and unofficial spouse, and the position is unstable in a very specific way that we will come back to repeatedly. Mizi Xia bites a peach. The language never recovers. Sometime in the early 5th century BC, a young man named Mizi Xia was the favorite of Duke Ling, who ruled the small state of Wei during the spring and autumn period. The story is preserved in the Han Feizi, a collection of legalist essays from about 300 BC. It exists because the philosopher Han Fei wanted to use it to make a point about how royal favor is fundamentally arbitrary, but the story keeps getting cited for 2,000 years for a different reason. One day, Mizi Xia heard that his mother was sick. He took one of the duke's chariots without asking, which was technically a capital offense, and rushed to her. When the duke heard about it, he praised Mizi Xia for being so filial that he risked execution to see his mother. Another day, the two of them were walking in the orchard. Mizi Xia bit into a peach, found it especially good, and handed the rest to the duke, who was charmed. "He has saved me the best of it," said the duke. "He could have eaten it himself." Then Mizi Xia got older, his looks faded, the affection cooled, and the same duke who had praised him for the chariot now had him executed for the chariot. The same duke who had been charmed by the half-eaten peach now cited the half-eaten peach as evidence that Mizi Xia had insulted him. Han Fei's lesson is that the facts of the case never changed, only the duke's mood did. From that day forward, the bitten peach is the standard Chinese literary phrase for a man whose lover lost interest. It is in poems, it is in opera. It is in the title of the earliest surviving Chinese essay, specifically about same-sex love, the poetical essay on the supreme joy, by Bo Xingjian, written around 800 AD. This is the part of the job nobody likes to think about. The favorite stops being the favorite. The story continues without you. You were trusted with the chariot. Then you were executed for taking the chariot. The two facts are not contradictions in court logic. They are the same fact at different temperatures. There is one other founding story you need before we leave this period, because the phrase that comes out of it shows up in Chinese poetry for the next 20 centuries. The man's name was Long Yang Jun, the Lord of Long Yang, and he was the favorite of King Angxi of Wei, somewhere around the late 4th century BC, during the Warring States period. The story is in the Strategies of the Warring States, a Han-era anthology of political anecdotes. The two of them are out fishing on a lake, says the anthology. Long Yang Jun catches more than 10 fish in a row, and partway through, he starts crying. The king asks why. Long Yang Jun says he caught the first fish and was delighted. Then he caught a bigger fish and immediately wanted to throw the first one away. "Right now," he says, "I am like that first fish. You favor me, but there are men in this kingdom more beautiful than I am. The moment one of them comes to your court, I will be the small fish at the bottom of the basket, and I will be discarded." The king, charmed and probably alarmed in equal measure, immediately issued a proclamation that anyone who recommended a more beautiful courtier than Long Yang-jun would be executed along with their entire family. This is the story that gives Chinese the phrase, "the fashion of Long Yang," another standing literary euphemism for a man with a male lover. It is also one of the better worked-out summaries of the structural problem of the favorite's job. Your position is not yours. You are competing, every day, with whichever beautiful young man has not yet walked into court. The trick that worked for Long Yang-jun, which was to weep at the moment of maximum favor and preemptively warn the king about the next favorite, is genuinely shrewd court politics. It is also the reason the Lord of Longyang lived a long and quiet life, while most of the other named favorites in this list died young. The Han Dynasty counts the score. Now jump forward 3 centuries and head to the Han Dynasty, which is the period when this whole institution gets its golden age. The historian Brett Hinch, in his 1990 book Passions of the Cut Sleeve, walked through the records of the Grand Historian and the Book of Han and counted up which Han emperors had a named, documented male favorite. The number is 10. Out of the first 13 emperors of the Han Dynasty, 10 of them have at least one named male lover preserved in the official record. Some have several. This is not a fringe statistic. The first 2 centuries of Imperial China, the period that gave Chinese civilization its first real bureaucratic state, its first census, its first standardized writing system, and its first really workable tax code, were also a period in which roughly 77% of the rulers slept with men, and nobody seemed especially confused about it. Han China was straightforwardly bisexual at the elite level, and the historians of Han China just wrote it down. The reasons the institution made sense, courtside, are similar to the reasons every pre-modern monarchy ended up with court favorites of one shape or another. A male favorite, much in the same logic that applied to court eunuchs, could not produce a legitimate heir. He could not found a dynasty that would compete with the emperors. He could be elevated, rewarded, given lands, given titles, and the worst-case scenario was that, when the emperor died, you got demoted, executed, or quietly retired. Whereas, if you were a male relative who had become the emperor's right hand, you might decide that you should be the emperor and start a civil war. The favorite was, structurally, the safer option. Han Yan goes hunting. The earliest celebrity Han favorite is Han Yan, the childhood study companion of Emperor Wu. Emperor Wu reigned from 141 to 87 BC, ruled longer than almost any Han emperor, conquered northern Vietnam, defeated the Xiongnu in Central Asia, founded the Imperial Academy, and personally selected most of the early entries in the records of the Grand Historian. He is one of the great expansionist figures of ancient world history, and he had several documented male lovers across his very long reign. Han Yan is the most prominent. The two of them learned to write characters on the same desk when they were boys. When the emperor took the throne at 16, Han Yan was made commandant of the cavalry. He rode with the emperor on every hunting trip. He slept in the imperial chamber. The emperor showered him with gifts and titles and gave him the same level of formal access he gave the chief minister. Sima Qian, who was a contemporary writing all of this down, mentions that Han Yan amassed wealth equivalent to a senior royal prince's household, which is a polite way of saying the boy who once shared a writing desk now owned half a province. Han Yan was a successful favorite for almost 2 decades. He was also, eventually, executed. The cause was a political scandal involving an alleged liaison with one of the Empress Dowager's ladies-in-waiting. The Empress Dowager, Han Yan's grandmother by political adoption, took the accusation as a personal insult to her household and ordered him to take poison. The emperor, who had to choose between his lover and his grandmother in front of the whole court, chose his grandmother. Han Yan died with the imperial favor formally on his head, a gold seal in his belt, and a cup of mercury in his hand. Dong Xian and the sleeve in the Sunday. The most famous favorite in Chinese history is Dong Xian, and his story is so widely cited that 2,000 years later, his name is still the punchline of an idiom every Chinese-speaking person on earth would recognize. Dong Xian was a low-ranking official at the court of Emperor Ai of Han, who took the throne in 7 BC at the age of about 20. The emperor noticed Dong Xian for the first time when Dong was working as a court attendant, holding the timekeeping cylinder during a palace procession. Within months, Dong was promoted to the Imperial Guard. Within 2 years, he was a marquis. Within 4 years, in 1 BC, the emperor made him commander-in-chief of the Han armed forces, which made him, on paper, the second most powerful person in the empire. Dong was 22. The cut-sleeve story is preserved in chapter 93 of the Book of Han, written by Bangu about a century after the events. The two of them, the emperor and Dong, had been napping in the imperial chamber. The emperor needed to get up. Dong was sleeping on his sleeve. The emperor took a knife from a side table and cut the sleeve at the shoulder so he could move without disturbing the man he loved. He walked out of the chamber half-dressed, holding the rest of the sleeve. The official next to him recorded the moment, and, the cut sleeve, entered the language permanently, The court hated this. Not because of the relationship, which was unremarkable in court terms, but because of the speed of Dong Xian's promotion and because the emperor was openly preparing to designate him heir to the throne, which was unprecedented and against every Han succession rule. When Emperor Ai died in August of 1 BC, after only 6 years on the throne, his deathbed wish was that Dong Xian inherit. The Grand Empress Dowager, the same political grandmother who had killed Han Yan a century earlier, did exactly what her predecessor had done. She seized the imperial seal. She stripped Dong Xian of all titles within 24 hours. She allowed him exactly enough time to go home, and that night, Dong Xian and his wife took poison together. He was 23 when he died. The cut sleeve, in other words, is not just a romantic image. It is the image of a relationship at its highest point, recorded by a historian who knew, while he was writing, that the lover holding the sleeve would be dead and disgraced within months of his patron. Chinese poetry has been working with that double meaning for 2 millennia. What Sima Qian wrote down on purpose. The reason we know any of this is that the Han Dynasty had a particular kind of historian. Sima Qian, son of the previous court astronomer, took over his father's job around 107 BC and spent most of his life writing the records of the Grand Historian, the first comprehensive narrative history of China. The records have 130 chapters. Most of them are biographies of statesmen, generals, philosophers, and rebels. Chapter 125 is the chapter Sima Qian called The Lives of the Favorites, in which he records, in order, the named male lovers of every previous Han emperor with the gifts they received and the manner of their fall. He is not snide about it, he is not condemning. He treats the subject the way he treats every other subject in the book, which is as if it is an ordinary and worth recording feature of the political life of the dynasty. Sima Qian had been castrated himself in the same court he was writing about, ordered by Emperor Wu, for the political offense of defending a disgraced general. He had as much reason as anyone to be cynical about the men around the throne. He still wrote the chapter as if it were a normal beat in the history of the Han. This is why we have the rest of this video. Most ancient civilizations had institutions like this, and most of those civilizations, for various reasons, did not document them in their official chronicles. The Han did. Ban Gu copied Sima Qian's structure when he wrote the Book of Han. Later dynasties looked at the Han chronicles, decided that this was how official history was supposed to work, and continued to include male favorites in their formal biographical chapters, all the way through to the Ming. The Chinese dynastic histories are, among other things, the longest continuously maintained record of named male same-sex relationships in human civilization. The Tang imports their own version. The Tang dynasty, which ran from 618 to 907 AD and is generally considered the high point of Chinese cosmopolitan culture, kept the institution but rebranded the language. The Tang court was full of foreign visitors. Sogdians, Persians, Koreans, Arabs, Tibetans, all of them sent embassies that stayed for months at a time. Chinese poetry of the Tang period mentions male favorites less directly than the Han chronicles, partly because the Tang aesthetic preferred coded references to direct ones, and partly because the institution was changing. The major Tang emperors mostly used a different word for what you are, lover, rather than favorite. Multiple Tang emperors had named male partners. The poet Bo Xingjian, brother of the more famous Bai Jui, wrote the poetical essay on the Supreme Joy, around 800 AD, which is the earliest surviving Chinese text that explicitly addresses same-sex love as a topic, and which lists Mizi Xia, Long Yangjun, and Dong Xian as the 3 founding figures of the tradition. The essay is fragmentary today. The complete version was lost sometime in the medieval period. We have it because a copy turned up in the early 20th century inside the library cave at Dunhuang, sealed up around 1000 AD and not opened again until 1900. Half of what we know about Tang attitudes to your job survived because a monk on the Silk Road bricked a manuscript into a wall. The Ming bans it and practices it anyway. Things change in the Ming dynasty, which runs from 1368 to 1644 AD. The Ming Code, originally drafted under the founder and revised under the Jiajing Emperor in the mid-16th century, formally banned sodomy as a criminal offense for the first time in Chinese imperial law. The penalty was, depending on the era and the magistrate, a flogging or a year in penal servitude. Enforcement was, by every account that survives, almost zero. What this looks like in practice is the moment in the institution's history where the public legal code and the private practice diverge most dramatically. The Zhengde Emperor, who ruled from 1505 to 1521, was famous in his own lifetime for his many male lovers, including, allegedly, the Muslim lord Sayyid Hussein, although modern scholars treat that specific story as politically motivated propaganda. The Wanli Emperor, who reigned from 1572 to 1620, was rumored to keep a private boy's household. The provincial gazettes of Fujian, on the southeast coast, document local marriage-style ceremonies between older and younger men called the Qi Exiong, the contracted brothers, that function as a regional adaptation of your job into a private civilian institution. The 17th century scholar Zhe Zhaozhe, writing in the late Ming, says that this fondness can be found from Jiangnan and Zhejiang in the south to Beijing and Shanxi in the north, and that there is no province that does not know it. So the Ming government bans the practice, and Ming literature documents it openly in every region of the empire. The legal code is a paper screen. Behind the paper screen, the institution is fully operational. The Qing dynasty sends you to the opera. By the High Qing, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the institution has shifted form. It is no longer a court-favored institution. The Qing emperors, who were Manchu and culturally distinct from the Han elite, did not maintain a public favorite class the way the Han had. But the broader urban institution, the one that lived outside the palace, blossomed into something the Han would not have recognized. In Beijing, a particular category of male performer called the Dan, the actor who specialized in playing female roles in the local opera, became the social and sexual centerpiece of upper-class Beijing nightlife. The most famous Dan actors were trained from boyhood, lived in semi-private establishments called Xianggong Tangzi, the houses of the boy companions, located deep in the alleys of the inner city, and offered, alongside their stage performances, a complete escort service to the scholar elite. The training began as early as age 7. The boys were drilled in voice projection, foot-binding-style walks, classical poetry, calligraphy, and sometimes the qin, the 7-stringed lute that had been the prestige instrument of Chinese gentlemen for 2,000 years. By 18, a successful Dan could entertain a table of imperial examiners, perform in a Peking opera at midnight, write a respectable poem on demand, and command, for an evening, the price of a senior bureaucrat's monthly salary. By the late 19th century, in fact, male prostitution in Beijing was so dominant that visitors to the city documented difficulty finding female prostitutes in the central pleasure quarters. The Qing Code, which had inherited the Ming sodomy ban, was openly ignored within the imperial city itself. Foreign embassies who came to Beijing in the 1860s wrote home about it in scandalized tones that, when read today, also read as anthropological data points. Your job, in other words, had been converted from a court institution into a commercial one and outsourced to the theater district. The job was running, if anything, hotter than it had ever run. The biographical record from this period is thicker than from any earlier era, because the Qing produced a genre of literary handbook called the Huapu, the Flower Register, which was effectively a published guidebook to the most celebrated Dan actors of a given Beijing season. The Huapu reviewed performances, ranked the boys by beauty and talent, and printed addresses. Most surviving copies are in the rare books collections of Chinese university libraries today, and they read, page for page, like the most genteel possible directory of an industry that everyone knew existed and that almost no public document outside the Huapu acknowledged in print. The end in 1907. The Qing sodomy law was finally repealed in 1907, 4 years before the dynasty itself collapsed in the Republican Revolution. The repeal was part of a broader legal reform driven by Western pressure and the desire of the late Qing court to modernize. By accident of timing, the legal end of the institution as a formal criminal category and the political end of Imperial China came within 4 years of each other. The republic that followed adopted modern criminal codes that were variously silent, hostile, or tolerant depending on the year, and the public institution of the male favorite, which had been a feature of Chinese imperial life from the spring and autumn period to the late Qing, simply lost its setting. That is, perhaps, the key thing. The institution always lived inside imperial courts, palace households, and the urban entertainment districts that orbited them. When the empire ended, the structures that had supported the institution for 2,400 years ended too. The cut sleeve became a vocabulary word. The bitten peach became an antique reference, and the only people who continued to use the language were poets and historians, who knew exactly which dead emperor each phrase quietly cited. What survived is the vocabulary. Your life as a male concubine in Imperial China is, among other things, a long lesson in how a culture remembers its own romantic life. Most pre-modern civilizations had institutions like this. Greece had pederasty. Rome had imperial favorites. Persia had the Aramenos system imported from the Hellenistic East. Most of those vocabularies died with the institutions. China is unusual in that the institution disappeared, but the vocabulary survived. The cut sleeve, the bitten peach, the fashion of longyang, the anling spring. Every educated Chinese reader between roughly 200 BC and the present has been able to read these phrases and know exactly which emperor and which lover the writer is referring to. The footnotes are still in the language. What the institution actually felt like, day to day, for the man on the favored end of it, is harder to recover. The emperors and their officials wrote down the public record. The favorites themselves, almost without exception, did not write memoir. The exception is interesting. There is one Tang-era poetry collection by a man named Tong, possibly the courtesan poet of an imperial household that survived in fragments and includes verses that read, even at 12 centuries distance, as a clear-eyed report from inside the institution. Most of the rest of the inside view is gone. We have the chariots, the peaches, the cut sleeves, and the names. The interior life of the favorite is mostly missing, recorded only in the negative space around what the historians chose to keep. You die, as most of the famous ones die, either young or in disgrace, or both. Your robe ends up in a wardrobe somewhere, with a hole in it. The hole becomes a phrase. The phrase outlives the dynasty. And 2,000 years later, somewhere in a modern Chinese language textbook, a teenager runs into the words, cut sleeve, for the first time, asks a teacher what they mean, and the teacher tells them about a sleepy afternoon in 1 BC, when an emperor took out a knife, rather than wake the man he loved. Rome did not consider itself a society that practiced slavery with any particular shame. It practiced it openly, systematically, and at a scale that shaped every dimension of its economy and social life. At the peak of the empire, somewhere between a quarter and a third of the population of Italy were enslaved people, and the variety of roles they filled was enormous. Most of them worked in agriculture, in mining, in construction, in domestic service. Some became accountants, tutors, physicians, skilled craftspeople, and some of them occupied a category that Roman law and Roman culture had codified with great specificity, the category of people whose sexual availability was part of their defined legal condition. You are one of those people. This is not a story with a clean ending. How you got here, nobody chose this, that needs to be said at the front. The Roman slave supply had several sources, and none of them involved the person being enslaved making a decision. War was the primary source. The Roman legions, when they conquered a territory, took captives. The captives were sold. The proceeds funded the next campaign. This was not incidental to Roman military strategy. It was an explicit part of the economic logic. Julius Caesar enslaved an estimated 1 million Gauls during his campaigns. The survivors of Carthage, of Corinth, of Jerusalem, of countless smaller cities and tribes across 3 continents entered the Roman slave market because Rome had decided their homeland was now Roman territory and they were Roman property. You may have been a farmer's child in Gaul, or a merchant's daughter in Cappadocia, or someone captured by pirates operating in the Aegean who sold their cargo to dealers in Delos, the largest slave market in the ancient Mediterranean world. You may also have been born into slavery, because the children of enslaved mothers were themselves enslaved under Roman law. The Romans called this vernae, homeborn slaves, and they were considered more valuable in some respects, because they were already socialized to Roman conditions, and did not require the breaking-in period that fresh captives needed. If your mother was someone's property, and your father was anyone at all, your legal status was determined by your mother's. You never had a free day in your life. The acquisition process was often brutal. Transport from the point of capture to the auction block involved conditions that killed a significant fraction of the enslaved population before they ever reached sale. The survivors who arrived at the Delos market, or at the slave markets in Rome's Forum Boarium, or at the trading centers in Puteoli, were examined, prodded, made to demonstrate their physical condition. Dealers put chalk on the feet of new arrivals to indicate they were recently imported. Buyers inspected teeth, assessed muscle, asked questions through interpreters. The entire process was designed to establish a transaction price for what Roman law classified as res, a thing, movable property, subject to the same legal framework as livestock. Your price depended on several factors: age, physical condition, skills, origin, and appearance all contributed to the valuation. A young person with no specialized skills was worth substantially less than a trained physician or a literate secretary. But youth and physical attractiveness were also valued for specific purposes, and if you fell into the category of someone considered suitable for the entertainment and sexual service of wealthy Romans, your price reflected that assessment. The legal architecture of what was about to happen to you. Roman law drew a specific distinction that is worth understanding clearly. Free people could not be compelled to engage in sexual activity without facing the same legal consequences that applied to any violation of bodily integrity. Enslaved people had no such protection. The legal principle was explicit. Your body was someone else's property. What happened to it was at the discretion of the owner. This was not an oversight in Roman law. It was a deliberate feature. The institution of the lupanar, the brothel, was legal, regulated, and considered an ordinary part of Roman civic life. Roman cities, including Pompeii, whose sudden preservation under volcanic ash in 79 CE has given historians an unusually detailed picture of its daily life, had multiple brothels serving different price points and clientele. The lupanar of Pompeii, the largest excavated example, had 10 small rooms, each with a stone bed. The walls were decorated with explicit paintings. Graffiti on those walls, preserved for 2,000 years, includes records of prices, names, and evaluations of individual workers. These workers were overwhelmingly enslaved. The Romans also had a category of venue called a thermopolium, a drinking establishment that often employed enslaved women in capacities that included sexual service as well as food and drink provision. Richer Romans kept enslaved people in their households whose availability for sexual service was an understood part of their status. The concubine relationship, a formalized but legally informal arrangement in which a man maintained an enslaved or freed woman as a long-term sexual partner, was common enough to have its own recognized social category. The legal status of what happened to enslaved people in these contexts was clear. It was not rape under Roman law. It was the exercise of property rights. Daily life in the lupanar. The physical conditions of the Pompeian lupanaria give historians a concrete picture that ancient texts alone could not provide. The rooms were small, the beds were stone, topped with mattresses that may have been cloth-stuffed, the ceilings were low. The paintings served partly as a menu of services available, and partly as decoration intended to project an atmosphere of controlled eroticism for the clientele. The prices inscribed on the walls ranged from a few asses to a few sesterces, amounts comparable to the cost of a modest meal. You were cheap. This was the point. Accessibility at low prices was the business model. The working day had no defined end. You worked when customers came. You had no legal right to refuse. You had no legal recourse if a customer was violent. The most you could hope for was that the person who owned the establishment had some economic interest in preserving your physical condition, which was true insofar as damaged property was worth less than intact property, but which provided no meaningful protection against the ordinary violence of a clientele that paid almost nothing for access and faced no consequences for how they used it. The names preserved in Pompeian graffiti are largely diminutive slave names or names indicating ethnic origin. Fortunata, Felix, Maria, names that were assigned rather than chosen, names that belonged to whoever their owner decided they were rather than to whoever they actually were. The graffiti written about them by customers is explicit, evaluative, and reductive in the specific way that arises when a culture has decided that certain people are objects to be reviewed rather than subjects to be considered. You ate what you were given, which was probably adequate in the way that maintaining functional property is adequate. You slept in the establishment, in the room you worked in, or in common quarters if the establishment was large enough to have them. You had no personal space that was legally yours. You had no money that was legally yours, though some enslaved people accumulated a personal fund called a peculium, with the toleration if not the legal recognition of their owner. You had no legal standing to marry, though informal partnerships and emotional bonds formed among enslaved people and were sometimes tolerated as long as they did not interfere with an owner's economic interests. The body and what the Romans did with it. The medical literature of ancient Rome is informative about what happened to enslaved people's bodies in ways that the authors did not intend as documentation of harm. Physicians like Galen worked in contexts that included gladiatorial schools and wealthy households, and their writings describe conditions and treatments in clinical terms that reveal the physical realities of lives spent in service. Contraception was practiced, though its reliability was limited. Ancient sources describe a range of methods including herbal preparations, physical devices, and timing-based approaches that have varying degrees of real efficacy. Enslaved women in sexual service would have had reason and likely access to whatever contraceptive knowledge circulated in their environment, but the evidence suggests they had limited control over its use and limited recourse when it failed. Pregnancy complicated an enslaved woman's situation in ways that were entirely determined by the owner's interests. A child born to an enslaved mother was the owner's property and could be sold separately from the mother or kept as an asset or simply killed, as Roman law permitted the killing of infants generally, and enslaved owners of enslaved people had explicit legal authority over the children of those they owned. Some enslaved women who bore children to their owners saw their children freed, and sometimes saw themselves freed as a consequence of that relationship. Others watched their children sold to pay a debt. Sexually transmitted diseases circulated through the population of the lupanar and through the households that maintained enslaved people for sexual service, as they circulate through any environment where sexual contact is frequent, unprotected, and involuntary. Roman medicine had limited ability to treat them, and the enslaved people who contracted them had limited access to treatment and no ability to refuse the contact that spread them. The physical deterioration that followed was documented by ancient physicians as a medical phenomenon and by the economics of the slave market as a reduction in asset value, not as a harm done to a person. Violence was ordinary. The Roman household was a space where corporal punishment of enslaved people was legal, common, and considered an appropriate tool of management. The specific regulations that limited the most extreme abuses of enslaved people were late, weak, and inconsistently enforced. Under earlier Roman law, an owner who killed an enslaved person faced no legal consequence whatsoever, because property cannot be murdered. Later imperial legislation made the killing of enslaved people without cause technically illegal, but the enforcement mechanism was almost non-existent and the standard of cause was defined by the owner's interests. The geography of sexual slavery in Rome. Rome's sexual economy was geographically distributed throughout the city in ways that made it visible, accessible, and normalized. This is a deliberate contrast with modern understandings of commercial sexual exploitation, which tends to be at least nominally hidden or confined to specific zones. Roman sexuality was not hidden. It was on the walls. It was in the public baths. It was in the circuses and theaters where enslaved performers worked in conditions that included sexual availability as a condition of employment. The balnea, the public baths, were centers of Roman social life, and also places where sexual services were understood to be available. Attendants at the baths, often enslaved, worked in conditions that included physical contact with customers as a matter of course, and the line between the massage and the sexual service was not a firm one. The Emperor Hadrian eventually issued regulations prohibiting mixed bathing in public facilities, an indication that the baths had been spaces where the norms around bodily contact and sexual availability were particularly fluid. The theater in Rome had a specific legal status that is revealing. Roman law explicitly classified actors and theatrical performers as having infamia, a technical legal status, meaning reduced civil standing, which, among other things, meant they had fewer legal protections. The association between theatrical performance and sexual availability was so explicit that the law formalized it by stripping performers of the legal standing that would have given them recourse against violations. The system was self-reinforcing. The people most vulnerable to exploitation were the ones the law explicitly removed from the protection that might have limited it. The city of Rome itself, at its height under the early empire, had a population of perhaps 1 million people, making it the largest city in the Western world and one of the largest in the world at any point in ancient history. The economic infrastructure that fed, housed, and serviced this population included an enormous apparatus of enslaved labor at every level. The sexual economy was not separate from this infrastructure. It was woven into it. The attendant at the bath, the server at the thermopolium, the domestic worker in a wealthy household, the performer at a private banquet, all of them operated in conditions where their sexual availability was somewhere on a spectrum, from implicit expectation to formal requirement. Outside Rome, across the empire from Britain to Mesopotamia, the same structures replicated themselves. Archaeological evidence of lupanaria has been found in Pompeii, Herculaneum, Ostia, and numerous other sites. Military encampments were followed by the service economy that served soldiers, which included sexual services provided by enslaved people at the lower price points, and by freed people and others at the higher ones. The empire exported not just Roman governance and Roman law, but the Roman structure of sexual exploitation, along with everything else. The question of agency within constraint. Roman sources mention enslaved people who developed relationships of influence or affection with their owners, who accumulated the peculium that sometimes allowed purchase of their own freedom, who navigated the system's margins with intelligence and sometimes with success. This is true and it matters. Human beings adapt to conditions. They find room to be themselves in whatever space the system leaves. The fact that some enslaved people manage some degree of agency does not change the baseline description of what the system was. The freedwoman Lycoris, a contemporary of Julius Caesar, became one of the most celebrated actresses and entertainers of her day after being freed by her owner. She had relationships with some of the most powerful men in Rome, including Mark Antony. She left behind love poetry addressed to her from the poet Gallus. Her story is preserved because she was exceptional and because she entered the circles of the literate and powerful. The overwhelming majority of enslaved people in Roman lupanaria left behind only the names on walls and the statistics in economic documents. Lycoris got out, most did not. Manumission, the legal act of freeing an enslaved person, was practiced in Rome to a degree unusual among ancient slave societies. Romans freed enslaved people at higher rates than most ancient societies, for a variety of reasons, including affection, reward for long service, economic calculation, and sexual entanglements that produced children the owner wished to legitimate. A freed person in Rome was not a full citizen but occupied a specific legal category with some rights and some ongoing obligations to the former owner. Freedom was possible. It was not guaranteed. It required either an owner willing to grant it, enough accumulated peculium to purchase it, or enough luck to find a patron who would arrange it. You may have eventually obtained freedom. If you did, you likely maintained obligations to the person who had owned you for years afterward. If you did not, you worked until age or illness, reduced your economic value, and then faced whatever came next in a city that had no meaningful provision for the destitute elderly, who had not accumulated resources or family connections. The resistance that did not register. Roman sources record occasional acts of resistance by enslaved people, and some of these took the specific form of enslaved people refusing the sexual demands of their owners or other persons with authority over them. These acts of refusal appear in the record primarily as legal problems to be resolved or as moral examples to be cited, rather than as evidence of the humanity of the people involved. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who was himself enslaved before being freed, addressed the situation of an enslaved person whose owner required sexual service directly. His advice was essentially philosophical resignation, the distinction between what is in one's power, one's own judgments and responses, and what is not in one's power, one's body and its treatment. The advice reflects the limits of what philosophy could offer to someone in that situation. Epictetus could not tell the enslaved person how to refuse. He could only suggest how to maintain an internal sense of freedom while the body was treated as property. The Roman legend of Lucretia, the noble Roman woman who killed herself after being raped by the king's son, became a founding myth of the Roman Republic. Her death triggered the revolution that ended the monarchy. The extraordinary cultural weight given to Lucretia's story reflects the Roman citizen class's understanding that sexual violation of a free woman was an offense of political magnitude. The same culture produced no equivalent story about the sexual violation of enslaved women, not because it did not happen but because the culture did not register it as an offense. The category difference between a free Roman woman and an enslaved woman was so fundamental that the same act produced entirely different cultural meanings depending on the legal status of the person it happened to. The economics of degradation. The Roman slave market was sophisticated enough to have developed specialized pricing structures for different categories of enslaved people, and the categories that related to sexual service had their own valuation logic that is instructive about how the Roman economy thought about human beings. Young people in good physical condition commanded higher prices than older ones. Beautiful people commanded higher prices than others. People with particular skills commanded premiums. A young person considered physically attractive who had also received some education or musical training could be valued at many times the price of an unskilled agricultural worker. The premium for attractiveness was not metaphorical. It was calculated into the transaction price, with the same arithmetic that applied to any asset with a specific use value. The Roman jurist Ulpian, whose legal writings were incorporated into Justinian's Digest and thus preserved, includes detailed discussions of how enslaved people's value was to be assessed in legal contexts. These discussions treat the reduction in value caused by physical damage or illness with the same analytical framework used for any damaged property. The legal category of actio injuriarum, an action for injury, could technically be brought by an owner if their enslaved person was violated by someone other than the owner, but the injury being remedied was the owner's loss of property value, not any harm to the enslaved person themselves. The enslaved person had no standing to bring the action on their own behalf. The rate of turnover in the sexual economy was high because the work was physically destructive and because the premium for youth was steep enough to make older workers economically marginal relatively quickly. A person who entered the lupanar as a teenager might find themselves economically marginal by their late 20s. What happened to them after their economic utility to the establishment declined is sparsely documented. Some became managers of enslaved workers, performing the same role they had performed. Some were sold on at diminished prices to less economically demanding contexts. Some were freed because it was cheaper to free them than to maintain them. Some simply disappear from the record, which in a culture that only recorded what had economic or social significance tells its own story. The taxes on the lupanaria are documented. The Emperor Caligula is recorded as having instituted or expanded a tax on the earnings of sex workers, including enslaved ones, in 40 CE. The tax was collected per encounter. The Roman state knew exactly what was happening and had decided to take a revenue interest in it rather than an oversight interest. The regulation of the lupanaria in Roman law was primarily about taxation and public order, not about the welfare of the people working in them. What Rome said about this? Roman intellectual culture had a complex relationship with the institution it depended on. The Stoic philosopher, Seneca, wrote that masters should treat enslaved people with humanity because they are human beings who share in the same rational nature. He also owned enslaved people. Cicero's letters mention specific enslaved people by name, and with what sounds like warmth. He also treated enslaved people as property in his legal and philosophical writings, without apparent contradiction, because the contradiction was one that Roman culture had decided to live with. The satirist Petronius, in the Satyricon, depicts a freedman named Trimalchio, who had been enslaved and sexually exploited by his master before being freed, accumulating wealth, and becoming a figure of social aspiration and ridicule simultaneously. The novel presents Trimalchio's background not as a source of sympathy but as a marker of his vulgarity. The degradation was something to be ashamed of, which meant that the victims of the system were expected to bear the shame rather than the perpetrators. This is the particular quality of Roman attitudes toward what happened in the lupanar and in the households of wealthy Romans. The existence of the system was acknowledged. The humanity of the enslaved people within it was occasionally acknowledged, particularly by Stoic philosophers. The people who profited from and participated in the system bore no legal or social consequences for doing so. The people who were subject to it bore whatever consequences followed them for the rest of their lives. The asymmetry was complete, and it was built into the law. How it ended? Most stories like yours ended quietly. Age reduced your value. If you were fortunate, you had accumulated enough trust or resources to have some form of security in old age, perhaps within the household you had served, perhaps in the company of other formerly enslaved people, who had formed the kind of family that circumstance and survival build when formal family structures are unavailable. The empire that built and maintained this system lasted another several centuries after Pompeii disappeared under Vesuvius. The volcano that buried the city also preserved its evidence: the rooms, the walls, the graffiti, the small stone beds. Archaeologists have excavated the lupanar of Pompeii, and tourists visit it today. The paintings are still there. The graffiti is still there. The names of the people who worked in those rooms are still on the walls. 2,000 years later, we know what their work cost. We know the prices paid for access to them. We know some of their names, the names that were assigned to them. What we do not know, because the system was not interested in preserving it, is anything about who they actually were, what they thought, what they hoped for, whether they found any peace in the time they had. The historical record is thorough about the economics. It is silent about everything else that matters. The Pompeii eruption happened in 79 CE. The city was buried, preserved, and excavated beginning in the 18th century. The lupanar of Pompeii was one of the most visited sites in the excavation from early on, its explicit wall paintings attracting a specific kind of scholarly and popular attention that was partly prurient and partly genuinely historical. For a long time, the site was restricted to male visitors. The names on the walls were catalogued, the prices were documented. The physical dimensions of the rooms, too small to stand up in fully, and too narrow to do much more than what they were designed for, were noted. The stone beds with their shallow mattress channels were photographed. 2,000 years of human history separated the tourists from the people who had worked in those rooms. The tourists came voluntarily, and left when they wished. The people whose names were on the walls did not come voluntarily, and left only when their owners permitted it. That difference between the visitor and the documented is the whole history of the institution. The tourist has the choice. The name on the wall did not. Everything else about the lupanar, its economics, its architecture, its place in the Roman social world, its philosophical invisibility in the text that the Roman elite wrote for the Roman elite, is a footnote to that fundamental distinction. In a country that loves official titles, where every factory worker has a rank and every street cleaner has a slogan, there is exactly one job that has never appeared in a Ministry of Labor handbook. Officially, it's a performance troupe. Practically, it's a state-run harem. Around 2,000 women, handpicked from high schools across North Korea, existed to keep the Kim family entertained, fed, massaged, and whatever else entertained might mean at 4 in the morning after a Hennessy bender. If you were a teenage girl in this country between 1978 and 2011, your school was a recruiting ground for it. Today, you find out what that job was, what it paid, and what it cost. 2 strangers walked into your classroom today. You are 16. You are sitting in geography class in some unremarkable provincial city, and 2 men in their 40s walk in, hand your teacher a list of names, and ask the senior girls to step into the hallway. They do not introduce themselves. They do not explain anything. They are quiet, polite, and have absolutely no patience for follow-up questions. This is the recruitment arm of Section 5 of the Organization Department of the Workers' Party of Korea, and they have your name on a clipboard for reasons you have not yet been told. They measure your height, they check the shape of your hands and your ankles, they write down your father's job, your mother's family background, and how reliable your political record looks, all the way back to the 2nd grade. According to a classified North Korean recruitment document later published in Defector Testimony, every party branch in the country receives the selection criteria at the start of the school year. Local officials then visit senior girls' high schools and forward the top 100 candidates to Pyongyang. Of those, about 1 in 10 survives the medical inspection. The final national haul comes out to roughly 30 to 40 teenage girls a year, plus 15 boys, who will be brought along as servants and silent witnesses to whatever happens next. What your family is told that evening: your country has chosen you. There will be money, there will be status, maybe a new apartment in a slightly nicer block. Your parents will say yes, because saying no in this country tends to come with a complimentary stay in a labor camp. Even if the job were terrible, the alternative is worse, and that is the trick that holds the whole machine together. Every spring, the trick produces a fresh shipment of 16-year-olds packed onto a sleeper train to Pyongyang, headed for a job nobody on the train will explain, in a city most of them have never been allowed to visit. Section 5 decides if you're short enough. The first thing you discover at the central inspection in Pyongyang is that the whole selection process has the bedside manner of a cattle auction. They strip you, they measure you, They check for scars. They check for moles. They check for old vaccination marks. They ask, in front of strangers, whether you have ever had sex. They make you read a paragraph aloud to test the softness of your voice. They listen for the particular pitch of a young woman who could plausibly sing on demand at 3 in the morning while a senior official yells about karaoke. The criteria are absurd in a way that only despotism can produce. You must be a virgin, and there is a medical exam to confirm it. You must have no visible scars or birthmarks. You must have a soft, feminine speaking voice. You must have what the inspectors call a clean face, meaning unblemished skin and what the regime considers symmetrical features. And you must, under no circumstances, be taller than 165 centimeters. Defectors have explained the height rule with a single deadpan answer. Kim Jong-il was very, very short. The dictator was around 157 centimeters tall, give or take an inch in the lifts of his platform shoes, and he did not enjoy looking up at women. So an entire HR pipeline was built around making sure he never had to. Consider the case of a defector named Mi Hyang, who told her story to Marie Claire magazine in 2010. She was 15 when this happened to her. 2 officers in their 40s walked into her classroom, took her aside, examined her, asked her about her sexual history in front of 2 female aides, and informed her that her birth name sounded like a countryside girl. So they renamed her. The new name, the one she was told to answer to from now on, was Mi Hyang. Her old name, by the way, never appears in print. The North Korean state had already taken that too, and she was not allowed to say it out loud for the next decade. Welcome to the Joy Brigade. Your body belongs to the department now. The Pleasure Squad is not one squad. It is 3 teams, organized with the bureaucratic seriousness of any other state institution, and you will be assigned to exactly one of them, based on what the inspectors decide you are best at. The first team is the Gamujo, the song and dance group. If you can carry a tune or remember choreography, congratulations, you will be performing show numbers at state banquets, hotel ballrooms, and the occasional palace dining hall. Think the world's least fun cruise ship circuit, except the cruise ship is a guarded compound. The audience is 12 sweating party officials, and one of them is the supreme leader, drunk and falling asleep in a chair while the band plays a song he requested 40 minutes ago. The second team is the Hangbokyo, the happiness team. This is the massage corps. You will spend your career rubbing the backs and shoulders of senior cadres who, for reasons best left unexamined, prefer their massages from teenage girls under the watchful eye of armed bodyguards. Officially, this work is non-sexual. Officially, the North Korean position on what counts as non-sexual is, broadly speaking, whatever the senior cadre says it is. The third team is the Manjokjo, the satisfaction team. This is the part of the pleasure squad that the North Korean state has spent over 40 years pretending does not exist. The Manjokjo provides sexual services to Kim, his closest associates, and selected guests. Defector accounts have described its existence repeatedly and in detail. The official North Korean position is that the entire Kipumjo is a slander invented by Western imperialists, which would be a more compelling defense if half a dozen former members had not already published their memoirs. You are not told which team you will be assigned to until your training begins. There is no mock interview, there is no career counselor, there is no aptitude test where you list your hobbies. They look at you, write a number on a card, and that decides your next 10 years. Your shot at being a Gamujo dancer instead of a Manjakjo concubine comes down to whether the right inspector liked the way you read a poem aloud on a Tuesday morning in March. Your first day at work involves a blood oath. Once you arrive at the training compound, somewhere in the gated residential zone of Pyongyang where regular citizens are not allowed, the onboarding process begins. It is not a normal HR onboarding. There is no slide deck about company values. There is no welcome lunch. There is no name tag. Instead, you are handed a needle, you prick your finger, and you write a pledge of allegiance to Kim Jong-il in your own blood. The pledge swears secrecy. It swears loyalty. It swears that you will never reveal anything about what you see, hear, or do during the next decade of your service to the state. Mi-hyang described this in her testimony as the moment it actually hit her. She was now formally, contractually, on a list that ended in either death or another list. From the moment she signed, she was not allowed to write to her family. She was not allowed to call them. She was not allowed to send them postcards from her trips. Her parents could only assume she was alive based on the small monthly checks the state mailed to their village. They were not given an address. They were not even given a province. Then the training starts. 6 months of it. You are taught how to pour drinks at a state banquet. You are taught Russian and Korean folk dances. You are taught to recite poetry. You are taught how to massage. You are taught how to behave in the presence of generals, including the highly specific etiquette of laughing at the right joke, looking concerned at the right moment, and refilling a glass before being asked. Some of you, depending on your team, are taken abroad for extra polish. During the Soviet era, training trips reportedly included resorts in Eastern Europe, where the recruits were chaperoned by minders and not allowed off the property. The state pays for everything. The state owns everything you produce. The state owns you. At the end of training, you go to your first interview. That is what they call it. The interview is a one-on-one meeting with Kim Jong-il, in which he decides whether you make the final cut. Survive that, and you officially begin service. Fail it, and you go back to the training pool for reassignment, often into the lower-status Hangbokjo team. Either way, your old life ended 6 months ago. Meet the boss. He's 5'3" and smells like Hennessy. Now consider the man you just swore yourself to. Kim Jong-il is, as already noted, exceptionally short. He wears platform shoes and a giant bouffant haircut to add the inches he wishes he had. He sleeps about 4 hours a night. He owns roughly 15 palaces, several of them connected by underground rail tunnels, because the supreme leader of an officially socialist republic apparently could not be expected to ride a regular elevator. His personal sushi chef, a Japanese man writing under the pseudonym Kenji Fujimoto, would fly to airports around the world to procure fresh ingredients, including live fish, so fresh that, as Fujimoto wrote in his best-selling memoir, the mouth was still gasping and the tail still thrashing when he served them. Kim drinks roughly a bottle of cognac a day. For 2 years in a row, he was reportedly the world's single largest individual buyer of Hennessy Paradis, importing somewhere between $650,000 and $800,000 worth of cognac annually, while millions of his own citizens were starving in the famine known as the Arduous March. He preferred Iranian caviar, Danish bacon, shark fin soup once a week, and rice grains that were, in his exact specification, absolutely uniform in size and color. Workers were assigned to inspect each grain by hand. He hated anchovies on pizza. His 10,000-bottle wine cellar leaned heavily on Bordeaux and Burgundy. He drank Asahi Super Dry from Japan and Johnny Walker Black from Scotland. This is the man you exist to entertain. He likes American disco. He likes strobe lights. He likes Hollywood movies, and he loved them so much that in 1978 he kidnapped 2 South Korean filmmakers, the actress Choi Yoon-hee and her ex-husband, the director Shin Sang-ok, and held them in North Korea for nearly a decade so they could shoot films for him. Choi later wrote a memoir about her time in the country. She remembered him as charming, terrifying, and constantly drunk in a way that was somehow both very sad and extremely dangerous to be around. He lives in a private bubble of imported luxury, so fully divorced from the rest of the country that, by some accounts, he genuinely believed North Korea was thriving. The job of the pleasure squad is, in part, to keep that delusion intact. You are not just there to dance. You are there to be a fixture in the dictator's personal reality, a smiling, well-dressed prop in a country that, outside the palace gates, is rationing rice by the spoonful. The parties are worse than they sound. Imagine it is the spring of 1994, and the chef Fujimoto is invited, for the first time, to one of the leader's private parties at a residence in Pyongyang. He later writes about this evening in detail in a memoir that becomes a runaway bestseller in Japan. His description goes roughly as follows. Senior officials are lined up in formal suits along one side of a marble-floored ballroom. Loud disco music is playing through speakers expensive enough to wreck a small business. Kim Jong-il is presiding from a chair, sometimes drunk, sometimes laughing, sometimes shouting requests at the band. A row of young women in matching outfits enters the room. These are the Gamujo and the Manjokjo combined, professionally trained and absolutely silent. At a certain point in the evening, Kim issues an order to the women. Take off your clothes. They do, because nobody in the room would dare not to. He then orders his guests to dance with them. The guests, who are senior generals and party officials, do as they are told. And then Kim delivers the only memorable rule of the evening, the one Fujimoto never forgets. Dancing is okay, but you cannot touch. If you touch, you are thieves. You are property. You are the dictator's property. Specifically, other men are allowed to look at you, but they cannot have you, because possession of you is one of the privileges that comes with being the boss. The South Korean actress Choi Yoon-hee attended a similar dawn party where Kim arrived with bloodshot eyes and slurred speech, having been drinking continuously since the previous evening, and demanded songs from a band of women in their 20s who looked, in Choi's recollection, half asleep on their feet. She remembered being terrified. The women, presumably, had stopped allowing themselves to be terrified about a year earlier, since fear was no longer a useful emotion in their daily routine, and would have shown up uninvited on their faces at the wrong moments. You don't get to call your mom, ever. Most jobs come with at least one phone call home. This one does not. From the moment you sign your blood oath, you are not allowed to contact your family. No letters, no phone calls, no visits, no photographs. They will not know where you are stationed. They will not know whether you are happy. They will not know whether you are still alive. The state will mail them small payments and pretend that is the same thing as a postcard. This isolation is not an accident. The whole point of the pleasure squad is to make sure no information ever leaves it. Members are housed in secure compounds, often in the gated suburb of Changwon in central Pyongyang, or at one of Kim's seaside compounds, including the famous Wonsan Villa on the eastern coast. Your daily life happens within a perimeter of soldiers, dogs, and electric fences. Some former members have estimated they spent 10 years of their lives without seeing the outside of a guarded courtyard, except in the back of a curtained car on the way to a banquet. If you are cooperative and good at your job, you accumulate small luxuries nobody else in North Korea can get. Imported skincare from Japan. Real meat. Fresh fruit out of season. Real coffee. You will eat better than 99% of your countrymen during a famine. You will also start to feel that you owe the state something, because gratitude is a useful tool for keeping people quiet, and the state is very good with tools. The really unsettling part of every defector account is the same. The women describe being well-fed and well-dressed, and at the same time describe wanting to die. The bodyguards are watching everything. The men patrolling those compounds were not strangers to the Kims. They were a hand-picked force called the Supreme Guard Command, and the most notable defector from their ranks is a man named Lee Young-guk, who served on Kim Jong-il's personal security detail from 1978 to 1988. He later wrote a tell-all memoir titled, "I Was Kim Jong-il's Bodyguard," which predictably did not get a good review from the North Korean state. Lee's testimony is one of the few outside views into the daily life of the compounds where you would have lived. He describes a parallel staff, cooks, housekeepers, drivers, security men, and the pleasure squad itself, all rotating through the leader's many residences on a schedule that was changed at the last minute almost every day for security reasons. He describes Kim ordering his guards to stay armed and silent at parties, and he describes the strict, unwritten rule that guards were not allowed to make eye contact with the women. He also confirms one of the more unsettling details about retirement from the squad. A great many of the ex-Manjokjo were eventually married off to bodyguards exactly like him. The state liked the arrangement because both halves of the marriage were career-dependent on never speaking. A bodyguard who started talking would lose his privileges. A wife who started talking would put her husband in a labor camp. The result was a small population of married couples in central Pyongyang who, by every available account, did not actually discuss their previous lives with each other. They watched television, they ate dinner, they slept in separate rooms. They aged. Retirement means a microwave and an arranged marriage. You will not work in the pleasure squad forever. Officially, the retirement age is 22. Some defectors put the upper limit closer to 25. The exit interview is brief. You are paid a lump sum of roughly $4,000, give or take, which in the North Korean context is genuinely life-changing money. You receive a few imported home appliances, including a refrigerator and a microwave, both of which were luxury items inside the country during the 1990s and 2000s. You sign another secrecy oath, and then you are escorted out of the compound and, mostly, married off. The grooms are not random. Former Manjokjo members are typically married to senior officials in foreign affairs. Men cleared to travel internationally and trusted to keep the regime's secrets out of foreign hotels. Other retirees are paired with personal bodyguards from the Supreme Guard Command. The state arranges the marriages itself, because nobody who has spent a decade next to the supreme leader can be allowed to wander off and start a normal life with a normal husband. You are too valuable, and you know far too much. The smartest move is to attach you to a man whose own career depends on you never saying a word. A few defectors who escaped the system have described the transition as the strangest feeling of their lives. You go from being a state-owned object inside a palace to being a senior cadre's wife inside a state-issued apartment, without any of the time in between to figure out who you are. You are 22. You have not seen your parents in 7 years. You are now technically married to a man you barely know. Your old self does not exist anymore. The state took her, the way it took your name on day one of training. Kim Jong-il did not invent any of this. The really uncomfortable thing about the Kipumjo is that the format was not new. North Korea is a young state, but the structure it borrowed from is older than the United States. During the Joseon Dynasty, which ran the Korean peninsula from 1392 to 1897, the royal court maintained a class of women known as gunyo. The system was codified in 1428 by Sejong the Great. The same king Koreans now put on their largest banknote and credit with inventing the modern Korean alphabet. Gunyo did everything. They cleaned, they cooked, they sewed, they wrote calligraphy, they raised royal children, and, depending on rank and royal mood, some of them served as concubines. When Kim Il-sung's regime introduced the Kipumjo in 1978, the founder, Ri Dong-ho, then first vice director of the United Front Department, did not need to design the structure from scratch. He took a 15th-century court arrangement, swapped out the silk hanbok for matching banquet outfits, swapped out the calligraphy lessons for cognac service training, and rebranded the whole institution in revolutionary language. The first batch of Kipumjo recruits served at the Munsu guest house in Pyongyang, entertaining Kim Il-sung. The original purpose, in other words, was to give a self-described socialist anti-monarchy the convenience of an actual royal harem, while pretending the institution was about modern dance. That is, broadly, How the rest of the regime works too. North Korea calls itself a republic. It runs as an absolute monarchy. The Kims pass power to their sons. They live in palaces, they keep concubines, they tax their peasants and starve them when the harvest fails. They simply use red flags instead of yellow ones, and put marks on the wall instead of Confucius. The wallpaper changes. The structure underneath is the same one Sejong the Great signed off on in the early 15th century. Kim Jong-il died in 2011. The squad was disbanded. Sort of. Kim Jong-il died of a heart attack on a moving train in December of 2011, reportedly while wearing his preferred all-weather jumpsuit. Within weeks, the pleasure squad attached to him was officially disbanded. Members were paid out, married off, and sent home. For about 3 years, while Kim Jong-un consolidated his power and held an extended public mourning period for his father, the institution went quiet, and outside observers assumed it might be one of the older traditions the new boss was willing to retire. That assumption did not survive 2014. Defectors in South Korean intelligence began reporting that the squad was being rebuilt, with officers once again visiting schools across the country looking for teenage girls. The new recruits were younger, in some reports as young as 13. The selection criteria reportedly relaxed slightly, since Kim Jong-un is a few inches taller than his father and apparently cares less about height than the previous administration. The numbers were smaller too. Where Kim Jong-il had reportedly maintained around 2,000 women across his network, his son's version is closer to 200. The Wonsan compound, the seaside palace where Kim Jong-un is rumored to spend large stretches of the year, has reportedly hosted parties for the new generation of recruits. The rules, by all accounts, are roughly the same as they were in 1994, when Kenji Fujimoto first walked in. Drink the cognac. Dance to the disco. Do not touch the women without permission. And, if you are one of the women in the room, forget by morning whatever you remember from the night before, because the next train of new recruits is already on its way to Pyongyang. So, how was your day at work? So that was your life. You were 16 when 2 strangers showed up at your classroom and decided you fit the criteria. You spent 6 months pricking your finger and learning Russian folk dances. You spent the next decade in a guarded compound on a strict diet of imported skincare and forced silence. You met the supreme leader of your country, who told you to dance for his guests but not be touched by them. You retired at 22 with $4,000 and a microwave. You were married off to a bodyguard whose name was given to you on the day of the wedding. Your old name does not exist anymore. You will not be allowed to publish a memoir unless you defect. And if you defect, you will spend the rest of your life answering interview questions from foreign journalists who are mostly interested in the cognac. Most North Korean teenagers, of course, never became Kapumjo. Most of them lived through the famine, worked in factories, and never saw a banquet hall in their lives. The pleasure squad was the gilded version of the country's bargain with its citizens, the version with imported caviar instead of starvation. It was still a cage. The cage just had better wallpaper, a bigger refrigerator, and a small monthly delivery of European face cream. If anyone asks you what you used to do for a living, the correct answer, even years after retirement, even after the supreme leader is dead, even after the compound has been bulldozed and the cognac glasses sold off to a private collector in Macau, is that you were a performance artist. That is the line they trained you to repeat. Stick to it. The state remembers everything, and the state has been remembering since 1428.